Number 10. Mindworm. Mindworm, aka William Turner, but not the William Turner from Pirates of the Caribbean, is very powerful with his mind, allowing himself to read people's thoughts, drain people's energy, and create illusions. Mindworm has a very large head and brain that he was born with. At one time, he was neighbors to Flash Thompson and Peter Parker when he moved in with Flash. Since Mindworm was always feeding off people's minds, it was no surprise that he was trying to feed off of Peter's mind as well. But since Peter's so smart, he could fight off Mindworm's attack to his mind. This upset Mindworm, and he later fought Peter, but of course he was unsuccessful and lost. Mindworm used this as an opportunity to figure out why he was even doing this, and after taking a hard look at himself, and realizing that his anger was coming from what happened to his parents, he makes peace with Peter, and he even uses his slogan, "With great power comes great responsibility." Unfortunately, Mindworm's story doesn't end great, since criminals manipulate him back to a life of crime, and he went back to prison, and afterwards he was killed by a group of people on the street. It's pretty depressing. Number 9, the Spot. So before he became the Spot, he was known as a guy named Jonathan, a scientist who was working for none other than Kingpin. Yes, so you know he has to be pretty evil working for a guy like Kingpin. Anyways, Kingpin wanted Jonathan to figure out a way to replicate Cloak's powers. Not such an easy task, as Jonathan would soon find out. Instead, he opened up a portal that sent him into a spotted dimension. I wonder if that's where he got his name from. When he was inside that dimension, his skin changed to where he had black spots all over bleached white skin. These spots were all around his entire body, and would allow him to teleport anything that he touches. He hated Spider-Man so much that he even formed a group with some of the people that will show up later on this list. Spoiler alert, one of them may be Grizzly or maybe Kangaroo. Maybe, but you'll have to keep watching to find out if that's true. But they were part of the Spider-Man Revenge Squad. Of course, it didn't really work out for him. Number 8, the Living Brain. So the Living Brain was created by the character Dr. Petty, and is basically an artificial intelligence robot machine. There was nothing that the Living Brain couldn't solve. So when it was brought to a high school, it gave 2 people a pretty good idea of what they could do with this crazy robot. They had the idea to steal it and use it for whatever they would go out and gamble. They attempted to steal it, but Dr. Petty didn't want to lose his creation and fought them off, and caused one of them to hit the Living Brain, damaging it and causing it to lose control of itself. It then turned on everyone and was on a mission to destroy, but luckily Spider-Man defeated it and saved the day. The Living Brain has appeared several times after this by, people either trying to use it to take down bullies or try to rob banks. The Living Brain was even part of the Sinister Six at one point. Number 7, Swarm. This is definitely a weird one. So are a lot of these ones on this list. So the Swarm was a Nazi scientist who survived World War II and was really into bees and poisons. He really wanted to try to make the bees he was finding very villainous and use them to his advantage. He discovered a beehive, and since he was trying to make them change their behavior, he was successful at doing that. But that is what ended up getting him killed by the bees and allowed the bees to use his consciousness and what was left of his body to become the Swarm. He has the abilities to fly and even turn as big or as small as he likes. He can also manipulate himself into different shapes. This makes it very hard for Spider-Man to fight him, since really he's just a swarm of bees. He also could control not only bees, but any type of insect. Number 6, Leapfrog. So Leapfrog, aka Vincent Patillo, loved to invent an assortment of just random items. He always wanted more though after every invention, and he was never really satisfied. That is, until he developed this invention so that he would be able to leap several stories in the air. He used this invention and created a suit to become the Leapfrog. This is how he began to get into the criminal world, but he didn't have the greatest success there, and there's not a lot about him.
Number 5, Red Goblin. During a fight with Spider-Man in The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, issue 798, it was revealed that Norman Osborn was bonded with the Carnage symbiote. Dun dun dun! Very scary stuff, guys, very scary stuff here. Spider-Man, of course, had an appropriate response to this news, and I've got a page from that comic in the links below there for you guys. Red Goblin then proceeded to threaten Spider-Man's loved ones, promising he would kill them, and not even as Green Goblin would with like a fall, but only as the Red Goblin could, unless Peter Parker gave up being Spider-Man. Also, the Red Goblin killing your family and loved ones is like definitely not a good idea. Terrified Parker agreed to the Red Goblin's terms, but of course he double-crossed him, promising at the end of the comic to fight on, not as Spider-Man, but as Peter Parker. Gasp. Red Goblin would then chase after his own family, his son Harry, his daughter-in-law Liz, and his two grandchildren Normie and Stanley. He was accosted during the ongoings of this family affair by Human Torch, Clash, Silk, and Peter Parker, and later Anti-Venom. But due to the combined powers of the Goblin formula and the Carnage symbiote, he was pretty much able to easily defeat those guys, because that's just how terrifying and powerful Red Goblin is. Not to mention, he's also one of the most ruthless and diabolical villains that Parker has pretty much ever come up against. So yeah, don't mess with Red Goblin. He will mess you up. You don't even know. Number 4. Null. Null has been at the center of one of the biggest, most exciting Venom story arcs yet, Donny Cates' Absolute Carnage. This storyline features, in fact, a spectacularly terrifying cast of great big bads, including a resurrected Cletus Cassidy in the Grendel symbiote, evoking an even more psychotic version of the recently deceased Carnage symbiote, Shriek, the Church of the New Darkness, and Doppelganger, an evil version of Spider-Man, basically. Null seeks to gain control over Cletus and be reborn. As such, Dark Carnage, as we now know him, prompted by Null, attempts to reclaim all of the codexes of those who were once bonded with symbiotes. Codexes are basically like a leftover remnant or an imprint of those symbiotes within one's body. Stored within the spine, by the way. Yeah, so you gotta take it out of the spine. Meaning that we see Dark Carnage as well as a whole bunch of other similarly influenced symbiotes go on a rampage, devouring spines of beloved heroes, villains, and characters both alive and dead, left, right, and center, who were once bonded with any symbiote pretty much ever. Yo, if you guys haven't read Absolute Carnage, you need to read at least some of it. Just at least like a tiny. Number 3. The Spider. The Spider is one of the worst alternate versions of Spider-Man we've ever met. He is super evil and is basically a version of Peter Parker that is combined with Cletus Cassidy. This alternate version of Peter Parker has red hair and was born a sociopath, because I guess everyone that has red hair is a sociopath. I don't know. I don't understand that connection, but you know, people with red hair, apparently they have no souls. He possesses a dark sense of humor and enjoys causing pain to others. He first showed up in the Exile series and hails from Earth 15. Like Carnage on Earth 616, he revels in hurting others. He possesses a symbiote very similar to Carnage, although it is actually known as the Spider symbiote instead of the Carnage symbiote in this reality. What could be cooler than seeing Miles and the rest of the Spider Army take on an alternate and evil version of Peter Parker? Also, Let There Be Carnage did well at the box office, right? I'm pretty sure it did. So wouldn't it make sense to have some kind of version of Carnage show up here? And this is like both. It's like a Spidey and a Carnage together. Number 2. Morlun. I'm actually a really big fan of Morlun, even though I feel like he's not really everybody's cup of tea. He's my cup of tea. I like the fact that he's a Victorian-style energy vampire from an alternate past. Morlun feeds on the energy of spider totems, hunting them down and feeding off of them. He is extremely powerful by himself and is sometimes not even just a one energy vampire kind of deal. So sometimes if you're facing Morlun, it's not just Morlun you're facing. Morlun is proven to be a hard foe to beat, especially because he rarely stays dead for long and usually shows back up to torment Spider-Man and taunt him, often threatening that he will be his end. Morlun is also the guy who ate Spider-Man's eye that one time when he was on the brink of death, plagued by a mysterious ailment. Number 1. The Inheritors. The Inheritors are the rest of Morlun's crew and family. They are a powerful energy vampire clan which hunt down various totems and consume them. Because yeah, there aren't just spider totems out there apparently, there's lots of other totems. Spider totems, by the way, if you're confused by what that means, are basically spider folks from across the multiverse who are destined to end up being connected to the spirit of the spider, either possessing powers related to spiders or some other important connection which generally gives them purpose in their life. The Inheritors ended up getting control over the Master Weaver, thereby turning him into an enemy of the spider totems, even though that wasn't his intended purpose to begin with. They used the Master Weaver's knowledge and power to travel the multiverse and hunt down spider totems within it. The Inheritors are generally led by Solus or Morlun, and their members have included Verna, Genix, Karn, Bora, Brix, Dora, Deimos, Malos, Mortia, Namura, and Thanos. And I probably said some of those wrong, so sorry about that. Like Morlun, they are also from the alternate reality of Earth 001. And in case you didn't know, the Inheritors were kind of like the main thing when we had Spider-Verse in the comics and then Spider-Geddon. So it would make sense that they would show up at some point in these movies. Please, I would like to see it. Maybe I'm the only one? Number 10. Sandman. Sandman has always had a kind of tragic story. He was a criminal who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and due to radioactive exposure was granted his sand shape-shifting abilities. He hasn't always been a villain, and sometimes strives to become a sort of hero, though he usually ends up becoming a criminal once more in the end, tragically. He even has been known to be a sometimes friend of the Fantastic Four's Ben Grimm, aka The Thing, and Spider-Man. One dark story involving Sandman took place during one of the many times he fought Spider-Man. Spider-Man usually had creative and sometimes twisted methods when it came to how he chose to defeat Sandman. He vacuumed Sandman up at one point, tossed him into a wind turbine, and he's even set him on fire. But Spider-Man also at one point exposed Sandman to an experimental chemical substance, which caused Sandman to become insane and also caused him to become severely dirty, as dust and garbage and debris became attracted to him and entangled within him. The worst part of this was when Sandman pleaded with Spider-Man to fix him, as his mental state continued to worsen and deteriorate. And initially, Spider-Man was actually a jerk and refused to help. Pretty messed up. Number 9. Vermin. Vermin was a Spider-Man villain who really only became such because of previously being abused by others throughout his life. Edward Whalen, as a young boy, was severely mistreated by his father and ended up running away because of this. He then ran into Baron Zemo and Arnim Zola and became the victim of their experiments, which transformed him into a rat-like humanoid creature. They sent Vermin on a mission to eliminate their enemy, Captain America. This conflict eventually led him to be apprehended later on by both Captain America and Spider-Man, who ran into Vermin in New York City. Vermin would also become the prey of Kraven during his last hunt, and from there would end up becoming allies with Spider-Man actually. Number 8. Hammerhead. Hammerhead has a pretty dark origin story in comparison to some other villains. He and his family had left the Soviet Union when he was young, and he grew up claiming to be Italian instead of Russian, even preferring to speak Italian in his family's home. However, this would anger his father and would prompt him to beat his son with a hammer, scarring up the young boy's head. That's pretty messed up. In the end, Hammerhead managed to work his way into the Italian mob and would also end up beating Spider-Man in a fight. He was given both cybernetic enhancements, including a partial adamantium skeleton, and had his strength level increased by Mr. Negative. He also has been known to work with Black Cat when she is walking on the more villainous, criminal, and organized crime side of things. Hammerhead would also get revenge on his father, killing him with a large hammer. His origin could have possibly served to inspire the Daredevil Netflix series Origins for Wilson Fisk, who also killed his father with the hammer. Number 7. Mindworm. Mindworm might not have been a major Spider-Man villain, but that doesn't mean that his story wasn't super dark and tragic. Mindworm was William Turner, a mutant with powerful psionic powers who was kinda like a mental energy vampire, not to be confused with Will Turner from Pirates of the Caribbean. William needed to feed on others' mental energy or he'd actually die. As a child, he accidentally killed his mother in front of his father, draining her mental energy completely. His father went into shock and died as a result of witnessing this. William would then be raised in an orphanage, studying passionately and known for his intelligence. As an adult, he fed off of his neighbor's mental energy, taking a little from each person in his area, but not enough to kill anyone. Unfortunately, Spider-Man was one of his neighbors and sensed what Mindworm was doing. Misunderstanding that William's psychic attack was for evil purposes, Spider-Man fought Mindworm and handed him over to the police. Later on, the two enemies would actually become friends. However, Mindworm would also later on once again relapse, becoming a criminal, as well as becoming severely mentally ill, in addition to being homeless. This all culminated into prompting Mindworm to give up when he was being attacked by a street gang and allow himself to be killed. So sad. Poor Mindworm. Number 6. Hobgoblin. There has been more than one Hobgoblin over the years, but many of them have proven to be quite dark villains. Roderick Kingsley as the Hobgoblin would be the one responsible for the creation or transformation of Peter Parker's friend and Betty Grant's husband, Ned Leeds, into another version of that villain. Ned Leeds was brainwashed by the Hobgoblin and convinced to commit criminal acts, even sometimes believing that he himself was actually Roderick Kingsley, the Hobgoblin, causing him to behave extremely villainously, adopting the Hobgoblin persona for himself. When Ned Leeds was murdered, it was because Kingsley had leaked the true identity of Hobgoblin as being Leeds, causing him to be targeted and killed by the Foreigner. Number 5. Morlun. Even when Morlun is not threatening the entire existence of all of the spider totems in massive stories like Spider-Verse or Spider-Geddon, he's still pretty terrifying. Despite looking like a gothic vampire wannabe, Morlun is actually one of the Inheritors, a family of energy vampires who feed off of totems throughout the multiverse. In the story The Other, he also tormented Peter mercilessly, almost killing him at one point, beating him to death, and eating one of his eyeballs. Ew.
Coming in number 5, we have typeface. You know what everyone loves? Signage! So why don't you make your persona based off that? I'm sure that will pull in a ton of people and you'll become one of the most famous supervillains of all time. No way, man, signage is super lame. Well, typeface, also known as Gordon Thomas, didn't think so, and he had a pretty good foundation. He was a Vietnam War vet who was skilled in hand-to-hand combat, military tactics, and all sorts of weapons. He even beat Spider-Man in their first encounter. If this guy changed his theme to anything other than signage, he probably would have been pretty cool. But the reason that he did this was because when Thomas came back from war, his life fell apart and he ended up getting a job at a sign shop, and it was the only time in his life where he ever felt happy. When the place was bought out, he lost his job, and this was his inspiration to become a villain. Luckily, he eventually switched sides and becomes a hero. If you're gonna get an F on your character, you might as well be on the side of good.
Number 4. The Spot. This guy is something else. Some people think his powers are pretty cool and others hate him, but he definitely belongs on this list. Spider-Man himself bursts into tears laughing upon meeting this guy, and looking like a Dalmatian, it's pretty easy to see why. He's all white, covered in black spots that function as two-way portals. That's pretty much his main thing. He takes the spots and he chucks them around and uses them like portals, like this is Looney Tunes, messing around with Spider-Man and even making him punch himself in the face. If this guy doesn't sound lame enough already, the more portals that he throws around, the less spots that he has on his body, making himself more vulnerable. He got these powers after being exposed to the spotted dimension, and the spots can even be suspended in mid-air. It's honestly a pretty cool concept, but the villain himself is just too lame to make it work for me.
Number 3. Lizard. Lizard is back to shed levels of scary currently in the comics as we gear up for Sinister War. In order to get the villain back on the Sinister Six team, he had his reptile half separated completely from Kurt Connors, meaning that he's full animal instincts and is out for blood. Definitely a deadly loose cannon you want to keep your eyes on, especially considering in the past it's usually been Doc Connors' presence within that beast that has allowed Spider-Man to defeat the villain, usually finding a way to appeal to his humanity. But with his humanity stripped away, Lizard is being set up to become more deadly than ever. And I am here for it. It's Lizard's turn, baby. Number 2. Kindred. Kindred for a while was one of the biggest and most mysterious baddies that Spider-Man was up against in his own series. We didn't really know who Kindred was for a long time, or what his deal was, other than he knew Peter very well, and also seemed to bear a long-time grudge against both him and villain Norman Osborn. He also seemed to have a soft spot for Mary Jane. This would all make a lot more sense when Kindred was revealed to be Harry Osborn. As Kindred, Harry is now kind of part demon, and is likely in league with another big bad from hell. Although the other side to that is that Harry is also kind of trapped in a cell, so there's a lot going on here. There's still a lot to unpack with Kindred in terms of the mysteries. Kindred has centipedes that he can use to control others and influence them. He can also manipulate people's dreams, teleport, appears to be invulnerable, and can resurrect the dead. All in all, he's a pretty intimidating villain, with or without the mystery that once surrounded him, and still kinda does surround him. Number 1. Mephisto. Mephisto has proven to be another key player not just in Peter Parker's life as his antagonist, but also just in the Spider-Verse in general. He's also gotten involved in messing with the lives of Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen aka Ghost Spider as we know her now, and even Superior Spider-Man aka Doc Ock. Mephisto, it seems, is going to be coming back with even more surprises for Peter. In Sinister War, we know that Spider-Man will be going up not just against Kindred, but also multiple versions of the Sinister Six, each with their own motives. Perhaps he'll be wresting his marriage from the villain, as that seems to be where we've been headed for a while with this build-up. We're also definitely going to get to see Mephisto face off with Doctor Strange, so there's a lot of cool stuff going on. It's great.
And it's Chameleon. Being the first villain Spider-Man ever faced way back in Amazing Spider-Man #1 in 1963, I think we're due for a chameleon appearance in the MCU, and honestly, I think we could be getting it. With the build up to No Way Home on the horizon, with the movie planning to come out this Christmas, I have a sinking feeling that what we'll be seeing isn't exactly a multiverse of villains, but rather Chameleon taking on these other appearances. We've already had a theory of the Chameleon being present in Far From Home, especially since John Watts revealed that it would be great for the Chameleon to appear in Far From Home before settling on Mysterio, and with the insane technology being present in the MCU at this point, they could really do anything they wanted. So Chameleon really being the villain in No Way Home is certainly what I'm betting on. It would make people mad for sure, but it would be such a good twist. The only way I'm not going to believe it is until either after the movie's done or if we see two villains at the same time. In at 9, Rhino. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man #41 from 1966, the Rhino, otherwise known as Alexei Setsevic, underwent an experimental procedure that gave him an artificial skin and super strength. While not being the brightest or the sharpest tool in the shed, we have already seen a version of this character on the big screen during the final moments of the Amazing Spider-Man 2, which means that we may actually see him in the next Spider-Man MCU movie, if this actually does turn out to be the multiverse and not the Chameleon. However, if we do end up seeing a true MCU version, I'd rather have one closer to the original or the Spider-Man Sony video game rather than the mechanized one we see in Amazing Spider-Man 2. Just personal preference. Not everyone can have outstanding technology, right? Plus, the mech version is more along the lines of the Ultimate Universe, and after that whole Wanda Pietro thing, I'm staying well away from that. And at 8, Hobgoblin. Being introduced in Amazing Spider-Man #238 in 1983, the Hobgoblin was inspired by the work of Green Goblin and has been a moniker used by a few individuals, including the original Roderick Kingsley, followed by Jason McIndale during the late 80s and 90s, and after that Phil Urich. The character also made an appearance in the 1990s Spider-Man animated series and actually appeared before the Green Goblin made his debut in that show. With No Way Home introducing the Green Goblin to the MCU, and Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin no less, the potential for someone to be inspired by him is present, and if Norman ends up leaving his glider behind, Hobgoblin would have an easy time either stealing it or acquiring it and using it for his own nefarious means. Hobgoblin honestly used to freak me out as a kid. I can't quite remember why, but either way I'd love to see an adaptation of this character appear in the MCU facing off against Tom Holland's Spider-Man. It would also give him his own unique goblin since Tobey already got the most iconic one.
Number 7, Ultimatum. Ultimatum is actually an alternate and evil version of Miles Morales in the comics who hails from the main continuity of Earth 616. You see, in the comics, Miles is actually not from the main continuity, not originally, but instead from an alternate universe, the universe of Earth 1610, known as the Ultimate Universe, because that was the line of comics that it was a part of. The Ultimates themselves were actually a superhero team akin to Earth 616's Avengers. On Earth 616, Miles Morales was a criminal who ended up traveling for a time to Earth 1610. When he returned home to Earth 616, he learned that Miles Morales of 1610 was also residing there. Resentful of the other Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and wanting him out of his way, he aimed to send Miles and his family back to their home reality of Earth 1610, against their will, obviously. Fortunately, Miles and his uncle, Aaron Davis, aka Prowler, who also wound up resurrected and on Earth 616, foiled the plot of Ultimatum, defeating him. At least, for now. Miles is such a sweetheart in the animated Spider-Verse reality, so I'd really love to see him fight against someone who is very much his opposite. I definitely want to see Miles take on his evil version. Number 6, Peter Parker 2099. In an alternate 2099 future, not the same reality that Miguel is from, Peter Parker actually becomes the CEO of Alchemax, the villainous corporation that Spider-Man 2099 once worked for. In this reality, Peter Parker was still Spider-Man, but allowed the public to believe that the hero was dead. Retired from heroics, he became the CEO of Alchemax, working sort of in secret, because you know, he's supposed to be dead. His plan was to fix his past mistakes and bring back all of those people whom he couldn't save during his time as Spider-Man. This alternate version of Peter also has a prolonged lifespan due to fancy future anti-aging technology, so that's how he's still alive, by the way. He attempts to get Miguel from the alternate 2099 reality, which is I guess really the main 2099 reality, and his own younger self to join him, but both refuse, prompting 2099 Peter to fight Miguel. This evil version of Spider-Man I think could fit well into Across the Spider-Verse as a main antagonist, considering his whole plot involves rewriting reality, which you know could potentially affect and threaten the entire multiverse. 2099 Peter Parker comes from the Spider-Man video game Edge of Time, where he was revealed as the main antagonist. Or well, he ended up kind of being the main antagonist I guess at the end of the game. Also, while Edge of Time wasn't well received, and I know that, the story in general was praised. And I think the story is pretty cool, so yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Number 5. Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is a version of Spider-Man who is also Dr. Otto Octavius. Let me explain. Back in the 616 comic book continuity, Otto is basically dying and manages to trick Peter into a body swap scenario. While Peter is trapped inside Otto's failing body and dies, Otto lives on in Peter's body as Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man to be exact, because you know, this is Otto, so he's like, I'm gonna be the best Spider-Man ever. Peter would eventually return, and Otto would also go back to his usual Doc Ock appearance and his hijinks, but for a time, he was the Spider-Man of the 616 reality. He's done good and bad things before in the comics, and ended up accidentally bringing back the Inheritors after they were defeated the first time in Spider-Verse. Oops. Superior Spider-Man, while known for being a villain, is also like an anti-hero, so we could really see him in either light were he to show up in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. But yeah, he's been a villain and a hero, so I figured I could still count him as a villain for this list. I just really want Superior Spider-Man. I think a lot of us do. Number 4. Army of Doc Ocks. Why stop at 1? Or I guess 2 Doc Ocks when we could have a whole army of them, right? I mean, there isn't just Doc Ock Otto Octavius somewhere out there. We also have Olivia Liv Octavius's version, and we could have Superior Spider-Man as well. There are lots of cool alternates of Otto out in the multiverse that we could meet in Across the Spider-Verse, and Doc Ock is such a powerful and interesting villain that we could have a whole army of them to face. I'm not sure what the motivation would be, or like who would ultimately be the Doc Ock in charge, the like head Doc Ock. Maybe Superior, but I'm sure when all those octopi put their minds and I guess their tentacles together, they could come up with some pretty ingenious schemes. Also, I feel like now that I said put their tentacles together, I'm like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I said it. And you know what? Sometimes you gotta be like all tentacles in and then get your mind out of the gutter.
Getting close to the end, and in number 3, Shathra. An inhabitant of the astral plane, Shathra is the spider wasp to Peter Parker's spider. She learned of Spider-Man when he strayed from the safe path during a visit to the astral plane to locate the interdimensional kidnapper known as the Shade. Shathra immediately realized Spider-Man's true nature and determined that he would make the perfect meal for her hungry young hatchlings. Great! First introduced in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 number 46 in 2002, Shathra quickly followed Spider-Man's scent back to Earth. She engaged Spider-Man in a battle that demonstrated her clearly superior speed and strength, but Spider-Man was able to use his superior knowledge of New York City to find temporary escape. But of course he only knew that it was a matter of time before Shathra would locate him once more. Shathra turned the game in a new direction though, changing to a human form and adopting the name Sharon Keller. And she went on TV to pose as Spider-Man's jitted lover. She went on TV and revealed a series of convincing and humiliating details, and of course this made Mary Jane upset. So, spurred on by Mary Jane's distress, Peter rose to the taunt. He gatecrashed the studio interview and attacked Sharon Keller in full view of live TV. Shathra reverted to her Spider-Wasp form, but her gambit had achieved its goal of pushing Spider-Man to act on pure instinct, which ended up making him the prey, because they were at their actual primordial positions. He was the prey, she was the hunter because she's the Spider-Wasp. You get it, you get it. But ultimately, in at number 2, Chameleon. Being the first villain Spider-Man ever faced way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 1 from 1963 and my costume from yesterday, I think that Chameleon is a more underrated villain than he should be. Being able to look like anyone at any time is pretty damn overpowered, especially when you can use it to look like Spider-Man and even use suction cups to stick to walls, even if it's slightly unrealistic. This character is especially powerful when he has superpowers, like in the 90s animated Spider-Man series, where after Alistair Smythe infused him with a techno-organic virus, could simply look at you and end up transforming into you. It's actually insanely overpowered when you look at it like that, since he can also transform his clothes. He could be fleeing from Spider-Man and turn the corner and then be anyone, so it's certainly someone to fear, unless they use the original version who has to use disguises and makeup to look like anyone they want, since that process takes time and can't be turned on and off. And finally, in at number 1, the Spot. As a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Owen was assigned to reproduce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. Working late one night, he succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. In doing so, however, the drain on the city's power became so great that a blackout washed over the city, causing the portal to shimmer and destabilize. Fearful of losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Owen stepped into it, and the power shortage caused the portal to send him to a different dimension, a place of half darkness and half light. fight. When Owen emerged back into his lab, his body had undergone a radical transformation. The portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him with black spots from head to toe. The reason this is absolutely terrifying, and is the most overpowered villain you wouldn't expect, is because he now had the ability to control these portals. If the man wanted to decapitate you, he easily could. Just close a portal at any part of your body, and then boom, amputation, around your neck, you're dead. It's horrifying. Spider-Man in the 90s cartoon would use these portals to land a punch on Owen, but if Owen just decided to close it or he lost his focus to keep them open, that would have been real bad. Just stay away from this guy, straight up. Don't even try to fight him.
Number 10. Stunner. Angelina is one we all forget. She was for a time the devoted and loyal ally and girlfriend to Otto Octavius, who used his smarts to create virtual reality tech that allowed Angelina to live through a virtual form, an avatar who is stronger and that Angelina considered was more attractive in comparison to her true biological form. She got knocked into a coma for years following an explosion, and when she awoke years later, she learned that Otto had died, though really Otto had moved his consciousness into Peter's body, becoming Superior Spider-Man. She swore revenge on Spider-Man, not knowing this, and once again took her virtual form of Stunner. Sadly, she was later defeated when her tech was disabled, and Superior Spider-Man created a virtual version of Otto to break up with Angelina. Number 9. Chameleon. One of the Spider-Man villains who I think deserves more recognition is the Chameleon. He's not only a great and powerful Spider-Man villain, but is also one of the oldest ones around, making his first appearance in the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 1. He's been here since the beginning, baby! Dmitry Smerdyakov is also related to another powerful Spider-Man villain, Kraven the Hunter. Chameleon is in fact Kraven's half-brother. Where Kraven brings strength and hunting prowess to the table as a villain, Dmitry brings intrigue, his intellect, and originally his technology, which was responsible for him being able to transform so perfectly into any person he wished to impersonate. Later on, however, this power was later changed to instead be a power granted through an experimental treatment. He's also been known to slowly kill his victims in an acid bath, and it is their cries for help that helps him to perfect his mimicry of their voice. Number 8. Sandman. One of the most powerful villains around, especially as he can turn into and manipulate sand, just as long as there are no vacuums around for him to get trapped in, which is a thing that has happened in the comics before. Seriously, you can check it out in the original run of the Amazing Spider-Man in issue number 4. Though thankfully years later that was retconned to be a choice and not a weakness of Sandman's. So in reality, no, vacuums aren't that dangerous to the villain, who can not only reduce himself to tiny and deadly particles of sand which he can control, but who can also harden himself to be as tough as a very thick and solid rock face. Sometimes I just think, listen to what you're saying, Amanda. When you wrote that, people are definitely gonna be like, would you just say he can harden himself? But I mean his body, his form, okay? Get your minds out of the gutter. Sandman is powerful because of all he can accomplish in his sandy form, and all he can withstand. He's also played not only the part of a powerful villain and member of the Sinister Six, but has also been a powerful ally to Spider-Man at times as well. Number 7. Kingpin. When it comes to strength and influence, Kingpin is one of the best out there. I mean, or should I say the worst? He's one of the worst. When you think Kingpin, you might think of Daredevil when it comes to his greatest enemy, but although Spider-Man might not be his number 1, Kingpin has still been terrorizing the webhead in addition to Matt Murdock since the Silver Age. In fact, Kingpin made his very first appearance in the Amazing Spider-Man comic issue number 50 in 1967. How about that? Kingpin is not only physically strong, but is also known for being a criminal mastermind with enough influence that even locking him up can't stop him. He's just got that much clout and that many connections. Number 6. Rhino. One of the Spider-Man villains that we often forget but who is exceedingly strong is Rhino, Alexei Saitsevic. He himself is a hard hitter in Marvel Strike Force though, so if you are working on that Sinister Six build, then he might be one of the first to come to your mind when we talk about powerful Spider-Man villains. Rhino got his powers from exposure to a combination of gamma radiation and chemicals. This granted him super strength, and while he's often depicted as being not quite one of the brightest of all the villains, he still packs quite the punch with or without his Rhino armor. I gotta say though, when I think of Rhino, I still think of him first as a guy who looks like he's running around the city in a Rhino onesie, like in the 60s Spider-Man cartoon.
And number 5. Calypso. Making her first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 209, Calypso is a voodoo priestess who also happens to be the lover of Kraven the Hunter. After gaining her powers from sacrificing her own sister, it's safe to say she took the villain route. So what started out as her being the significant other to Kraven the Hunter soon turned into Calypso taking over the mind of the Lizard and using him. Not cool. You can see this take shape beginning in the Torment 5-part storyline. And with rumors of Kraven the Hunter being casted in the next Spider-Man flick, who knows, maybe we'll get a little sneak peek at Calypso as well. Fingers crossed. Number 4, the Red Vulture. Okay, so we talked earlier about the Red Goblin, so we might as well throw another big red in the mix while we're here. The Red Vulture made his comic book debut in Amazing Spider-Man issue 592, and while some may see the Vulture as Adrian Toomes, the Red Vulture is actually James Natal. So James started off working for the mob, of course, and then after the workload kept increasing and increasing, he requested some help. So his superiors figured it would be a great time to use him as his test subject to make a new super bad. Using the same technology that had created the Fly and the Scorpion, but with a little hint of, memory loss thrown in there, Spider-Man found this monstrosity during a patrol, and he saw him eating a guy. He has acid spit, so it's not too hard to eat a guy. Even Peter gets some acid in his eyes. I mean, where's an emergency eye wash station when you need it? And coming in at number 3, Carrion, aka Miles Warren, made his comic book debut back in Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man issue 25. His powers are pretty amazing. I mean, I would love to see more of this guy. Everything he touches turns to dust. It turns to dust, red dust. It's very bad. He's creepy looking. I mean, he also carries this little pouch side carry bag, so he looks creepy, but he also looks like he's running errands. So, I don't know. He's taking lives, but he's also late for work. He's a weird looking guy. The initial Carrion was actually a clone of the Jackal, but the virus had made it outlive that body. So now we're left with this. Super strength, telepathy, levitation, super speed. It's pretty hard to avoid the touch of Carrion, especially when he's motoring. This villain didn't last too long back in the late 70s, but he's interesting enough to check out. So go do that. And number 2, Morbius. We have to include Michael Morbius, the living vampire. I mean, after all, Jared Leto is set to take on the bloodthirsty mantle with a sneaky little peek at Michael Keaton's Vulture at the end of the Morbius trailer that we got earlier this awful year. A lot of people are wondering who this guy is now. Making his debut in Amazing Spider-Man 101, Michael Morbius was, of course, a scientist, and actually a Nobel Prize-winning biochemist. Having a debilitating blood disease plus experimenting with bats to find a solution, you already know what's about to go down. The best part of his origin story is that when he meets Spider-Man for the first time, this just happens to be the time where Spider-Man is donning the 4 extra arms, and it's pretty entertaining. So Morbius, in his thirst for blood, is like, oh, that dude's got 6 arms, that's like a lot of blood. Oh boy, that would be pretty yummy. So Morbius attacks and does a pretty decent job. In comes Curtis Connors to help out, or rather, turn into the lizard and make Spider-Man's day go from bad to worse. I'm pretty pumped to see Jared Leto take flight with Morbius. I mean, I'm also pretty sure Jared Leto's already a vampire to begin with, so I'm sure his method acting will really come in handy. And closing off the list, coming in at number 1, we have Tombstone, a notable villain in the Spider-Man PS4 storyline, and making his debut in the late 80s in Web of Spider-Man 36. Tombstone, aka Lonnie Lincoln, grew up bullied due to his physicality. He was born albino and much taller and stronger than others, so naturally he himself also became a bully too. See how it works? Don't bully people. Here's an idea. Down the road, he embraced it and became one of the biggest, baddest hitmen out there, taking out the trash for Kingpin himself. Weighing in at almost 500 pounds and towering at the height of 6'7", Lonnie is strong enough to lift 6 tons. So if you're a fan of the Spider-Man game, you'll agree he's one of the hardest villains in that entire storyline, and for good reason.
You got some stones, Rick. Let's see if they break.
Number 10, Mr. Negative. Starting off strong, we have a supervillain who was introduced in 2007 and yet despite being newer to the Spider-Man supervillain roster, has quickly risen in terms of his evil acclaim. Mr. Negative's true identity still remains somewhat of a mystery to us. He was originally a member of a gang in China known for human trafficking. Looking to escape the criminal life, he stole the identity of one of the human cargo who had perished on the journey to the States, Martin Lee, who was setting out to America to join his wife. Martin Lee, and now that's what we think when we think Mr. Negative. He ended up kidnapped by Simon Marshall, who was developing a drug called D-Light, the experimentation of which often led to the death of those who tested it. He forcefully tested it on fake Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, and 2 other hostages of his who somehow survived the process. The 3 escaped and as a result of the experimental drug, developed superpowers attached to the Dark Force and Light Force. Martin Lee would become Mr. Negative, and the other 2 prisoners, Tyrone Johnson and Tandy Bowen, would become Cloak and Dagger. The effects also caused a split within Mr. Negative's personality, dividing the evil criminal persona of Mr. Negative from the kind and sweet persona of Martin Lee. Mr. Negative has the power to corrupt a person, bringing out the dark side of them with just a touch. He can also imbue weapons with the dark force, making them stronger, or increasing their strength, you know, whatever. Anyways, that's it. That's all you gotta know about Mr. Negative apparently. I told you enough, I told you his origins. Number 9. Hippo. I felt we had to include Hippo because a lot of these villains have just a lot of intense and serious elements to them, and they're all terrifying in their own way, but Hippo does a good job of providing some of the lightness to the new Spider-Man villain scene. After all, Spider-Man comics are often known for having some of the most, ridiculous villains? Comical villains? How can we put that? I don't want to insult them. Not to say that hippos aren't terrifying, by the way, because they are. You don't want to mess with a hippo. I know that. I certainly would not mess with a hippo. Still, Mrs. Fluffy Lumpkins, as Hippo was once known when he was a zoo animal, has a pretty comical backstory, being transformed randomly by the High Evolutionary and then setting out to rob banks because he knows no one would hire a semi-human hippo. The life of a supervillain. It's tough when you're part hippo, part human. Number 8. Massacre. Massacre is a pretty meaningful villain when it comes to those of them that reflect the issues of the times as well, though he is a little on the nose when it comes to this. He was caught up in an attack on Wall Street, and while his wife died during the attack, he survived, though shrapnel became lodged in his brain, and this shrapnel affected his feelings, causing him to basically become detached from his own emotions and his own humanity, enabling him to become a sociopathic villain. He set up shooting people at random, but was apprehended and spared by Spider-Man. He then did some time in Ravencroft, basically the Arkham Asylum of Marvel. After getting out of Ravencroft though, he went right back going on a shooting spree. But this time he was able to leverage millions of dollars out of the mass shooting. During this attack though, he was confronted by Superior Spider-Man, aka Otto Octavius, who was in Spider-Man's body. Otto shot him, and this allowed Massacre to feel fear again for the first time, which he reveled in before he basically died. But he might not be dead, so it's fine. Number 7. The Inheritors. Not everyone is a huge fan of these energy vampires, but they play an integral role in the Spider-Verse story arc. In both of the Spider-Verse story arcs, to be honest, Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon. The family of vampires who feed off of spider totems and any other animal-based totems were an extension of the original villain, Morlun. Morlun first appeared in the Spider-Man comics in 2001, and it wasn't until 2014 that we would meet the rest of his family, the Inheritors. These energy vampires threaten the existence of the entire Spider-Verse on more than one occasion. Picard himself, who was part of the Inheritor family, would end up defecting, becoming the Master Weaver. In the end, when the Inheritors ended up cloned and returned due to the error of Superior Spider-Man, the head of the family, Solus, and the rest of the Inheritors ended up defeated at the hands of an Enigma Force-powered Miles Morales armed with the Sword Vigor. And it was discovered that Solus was actually behind all the endless hunger that all of his family felt. Because of this, the Spider Army decided to bring back the Inheritors once more, with each of their consciousness transferred into a baby clone of each of them. Free from the hunger that made them evil, they were then all adopted by Spider-Man. Cutest little baby villains ever. We'll see if they grow up to be evil, but I doubt it. They're pretty cute. Number 6. Regent. Regent was also known as Augustus Roman. What a name, by the way, Augustus Roman. He was the man behind a prison known as the Cellar on Rikers Island, which housed some of the most dangerous criminals. Rikers Island itself is known for prisons of this sort. The difference with this one was that Roman was actually using the prison as a means of creating his own superpowered suit to go after the Avengers with. He was mistreating the prisoners, using them for their powers, which he was then able to utilize within his own suit. Roman was obsessed with controlling and containing the superpowered abilities of all superhumans, which he also aimed to do with the Avengers. This had a lot to do with his own backstory. He's got some feelings about superhumans, let me just say. During his fight with the team, we got to see him take on not just Spider-Man, but we also saw MJ join the fight as well, donning the Iron Spider suit. I love when writers let MJ get involved in some of the action. Regent proved to be a challenging foe for the Avenger team, and for Spider-Man, and for MJ, for everyone that was involved. Number 5. Carnage. I was actually tempted to put Carnage even higher on this list because he's just so powerful. Cletus Cassidy might be deadly. Not deadly, dead inside, literally. Cletus Cassidy might be dead inside, but he still managed to live on throughout the Absolute Carnage story arc and become reinvented as an even more terrifying villain once bonded to the Grendel symbiote, becoming not just Carnage, but Dark Carnage. And yeah, he was ultimately defeated, but hey, what a ride it was. Carnage not only terrorized Venom, aka Eddie Brock, and his son Dylan, but he also managed to kick the butt of both Spider-Men, both Peter Parker and Miles Morales. Let's also not forget that when Carnage first appeared, raining down destruction and chaos in the comics, Spider-Man also needed to team up with Venom to even stand a chance against the villain. Number 4. Norman Osborn. While Norman Osborn might not be the most physically powerful of all Spider-Man's opponents, he is definitely one of the most powerful in terms of influence and genius. One of the most influential villains of all time for sure. Norman Osborn has definitely caused Peter and many adjacent loved ones and allies the most grief and pain over time. Norman is also so powerful that he moved from being solely a Spider-Man villain to an Avengers villain and really kind of an all-heroes villain during the Dark Reign storyline, which is pretty impressive.
Getting close to the end in at number 3, Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man. Being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series from the 1990s, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his early life with the superior counterpart. However, the difference between the two was Aunt May at some point died as well, being buried next to Uncle Ben. But thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals by Jonathan Owen, a version of the Carnage symbiote sensed this Peter's anger and combined with him, turning him into Spider Carnage, a villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Man after my own heart. This character would require symbiotes to be introduced, but oh my god would I love to see this character on the big screen. Even if he only appeared in the final few episodes, Spider Carnage is one of the coolest iterations of Spider-Man to date in my opinion, and is part of the reason why I love the 90s cartoon so much. Seeing this on screen would be a dream come true for me, and while it may not be possible, I want it so bad. I also want a pop figure of this character, cause that would be sick. Penultimately, in at number 2, symbiotes. On a more general note, symbiotes in the MCU would also be incredible. While they are mostly, I'm sure, going to be limited to the SSU, they would be required to see Spider Carnage or any other really insane versions of characters, like Red Goblin or even Venomized anything. Even if it's not Venom or Carnage, someone like Scream, Toxin, or even Anti-Venom would make an amazing addition in my opinion. The first appearances of a symbiote occurs in The Amazing Spider-Man number 252, The Spectacular Spider-Man number 90, and Marvel Team-Up number 141, all of which released concurrently in May of 1984, in which Spider-Man brings a symbiote home to Earth after the Secret Wars. Secret Wars number 8, which was released months later, actually details how he got the symbiote. The concept was created by a Marvel Comics reader, with the publisher purchasing the idea for $220. The original design was then modified by Mike Zeck, becoming the Venom symbiote. The concept would then be explored and used throughout multiple storylines, spin-off comics, and derivative projects. Imagine pitching something as big as that and being paid $220 for it. Well, okay, adjusting for inflation, that would be $516 now, which isn't bad honestly, but for a character like Venom, is absolutely abysmal. Finally, in at number 1, Morlun. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 number 30 in 2001, Morlun would be an incredible addition to the MCU, especially if they want to continue in the Spider-Verse sort of direction they appear to be starting in No Way Home. Morlun is potentially the biggest threat Spider-Man has ever faced, requiring a whole multiverse of spider people, or as they're referred to in the comics, spider totems, to take him down. Coming from Earth 001, Morlun uses these spider totems to stay alive, feeding on their energy and casually jumping from universe to universe to just squash their spider person like a bug. This guy is the backbone of the Spider-Verse concept, since a load of spider totems had to team up in order to take him down, but not without massive casualties. If they ever want a whole Avengers movie with just spider people, this would be the way to go.
Coming at number 10, we have Shocker. I think back when this villain was created, the idea of having someone who had vibrations as their superpower would have been a little bit harder to make fun of. Now, many of you probably know Shocker. He has had a few moments in the sun, popping up in video games, and he even has a moment as one of the henchmen of the Vulture. Now you think someone who is canon in the MCU wouldn't fit onto this list, but when we break him down, we start to learn that Shocker isn't that shocking. It would seem that this villain has a knack for losing to Spider-Man every single time, and it's probably because his powers aren't that impressive. He can make shockwaves that blast through the air, and he can make vibration shields. Yeah, I'm not that impressed by what you have to offer. In recent years, we have seen less and less of this punchline of a villain, as I think the writers have seen that his time has come, and he will soon soon be put to bed. As a kid, I always got him and Electro mixed up because I thought shocker meant that he was electrocuting people because he was shocking them. Well, at least for the new generation, you won't have those problems because this guy is going to be gone pretty soon. Coming in at number 9, we have White Rabbit. I mean, right when we start breaking down this villain, you will learn why she is on this list. It's one thing to be a down and out loser who's had enough of the cruel world and now wants to dive into a world of crime because everything else has let them down. But when you come from a rich family and you turn to crime just for the sake of being angsty, then I don't really have much compassion for you, and your character isn't really relatable. The White Rabbit, also known as Lorena Dodson, built her persona off the Alice in Wonderland book. She thought that would be a cool and edgy way to get into the world of crime. I think she just indulged in too many psychedelics and maybe went off the deep end. I wouldn't be surprised if this character was inspired by the rise of LSD in the 80s when this character was birthed. In terms of powers, she has zero. All she has is a bad attitude and a general understanding of martial arts. She's not a villain that any of us are clamoring for. Coming in at number 8, we have Mindworm. You know, for some of these villains, it seems that the writers went to so much work to really come up with someone who was interesting and had motivations for evil, but then they just throw them in the toilet, and that's what really happens with Mindworm. Mindworm starts off great. He has powers from birth. He's some sort of mutant kid with a huge head. Of course, he's weird and kids don't like him, but at least his parents love his huge cranium. But what Mindworm doesn't know is that he's feeding off the psionic energy of his parents, draining their brain. Eventually, he gets too greedy with this and he kills his own mother and father. He didn't mean to do this. He was just a young mutant kid who didn't know any better, and now he was an orphan. From there, he was bullied in the orphanage and he learns how to use his powers. Eventually, he grows up and is living in a New York apartment where he's feeding off all the people in the building and getting pretty strong off this. But Spider-Man moves in and he senses that someone's trying to suck out his brain energy. The two have a clash and Mindworm is killed by some gang members. Like, all of that work into building up who this guy is, and he was gone just like that. What a waste.
And at 7, The Spot. As a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Owen was assigned to reproduce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. Working late one night, he actually succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. In doing so, however, the drain on the city's power became so great a blackout washed over the city, causing the portal to shimmer and destabilize. Fearful of losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Owen stepped into it, which was a horrible idea. The power shortage caused the portal to send him into a different dimension, a place of half darkness and half light, kinda like my mind. When Owen emerged back in his lab, his body had undergone a radical transformation. The portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him from head to toe in black spots. But just think about how crazy OP this villain is, alright? He has the ability to control these portals. Like, if the man wanted to decapitate you, instantly he could. Best doctor in a sense, I guess. That's still horrifying. The Spider-Man in the 90s cartoon would use these portals against Owen, but if he had just decided that he wanted to just destroy him, he could have, and Spider-Man would have had nothing to do. So yeah, I want to see him make an appearance again somehow. And at 6, Spider-Side. Spider-Side is a more obscure and odd Spider-Man villain, but I still think he would be pretty badass. Being first introduced as Spider-Side in New Warriors number 61, this version of Peter Parker is one of the clones made by Dr. Miles Warren, because we all know how much we love clones, which is an entirely separate villain that caused the whole clone debacle and creation of Scarlet Spider and a whole lot of other things. What's notable about Spider-Side, however, is not only him having all of Spider-Man's powers, but also the ability to stretch and warp his body at will, similar to Mr. Fantastic. Spider-Side is certainly deadly as well, helping Jackal to release a virus in Springfield, Pennsylvania, resulting in the deaths of 2,600 people. But either way, Spider-Side, with all the abilities of Spider-Man and Mr. Fantastic, makes him pretty damn powerful, so I want to see him come back. They didn't do much with him, okay? And I like the name Spider-Side. Any evil Spider-Man, really, just bring me more. Halfway through into number 5, Red Goblin. After the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Carnage symbiote was secured in the Lockbox, a privately run vault at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Agents Crane and Coleman infiltrated the Lockbox and stole the symbiote, delivering it to their employer, Norman Osborn. Yeah, you see where this is going. After receiving the symbiote, Osborn bonded with it to become the new Carnage, hoping that it would be the key to regaining his Green Goblin persona. While the symbiote initially seized control of him, Norman offered to teach it more nuanced and sadistic ways to kill, an offer that the symbiote eagerly accepted. The fact that you know more sadistic ways to kill people than a freaking mad symbiote is a whole other topic though, dude. The symbiote turned over control to its new host, restoring his appearance and purging his body of the nanites, preventing him from augmenting himself with goblin formula. Osborn used the symbiote to kill Phil Urich, and after pretending to be mortally wounded in a rematch against Spider-Man as the Green Goblin, unveiled his new partner by transforming into the monstrous Red Goblin. Osborn used the symbiote to great effect, incapacitating Spider-Man's allies and loved ones, and bonding a portion of the symbiote to his grandson to turn him into the new Goblin Child. Spidey was only able to defeat Red Goblin by taunting Osborn, saying that killing him would only give Carnage the credit and not him, which caused Osborn to remove the symbiote from himself. So he couldn't defeat Red Goblin, he had to defeat Osborn. Yeah, this is one of my favorite Carnage versions, so I want to see this come back, please. Like the next Venom movie. Or a No Way Home. In at number 4, Demo Goblin. After losing fights with Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, Jason Philip Macendale Jr., aka Hobgoblin, took advantage of the Inferno Crisis by following several demons back to their lair and confronting their demonic lord Natshir. Macendale wanted enough power to defeat his enemies and offered his soul to the demon in exchange for such power. When the demon stopped laughing, he decided that Macendale's effort was worth something even if his soul wasn't, and he had him possessed. This gave Macendale the physical strength that he craved, coupled with superhuman speed and endurance. Unfortunately, I guess you could say for him at least, the demon who possessed him proved to be incompatible, and the two fought many a battle for control over Macendale's physical form until the demon literally ripped himself out of his human host and began a separate existence as the Demogoblin, a form of anti-hero in a sense who would kill anyone who has sinned, which is basically everyone. Except he would stay away from children, even dying to protect one. Getting close to the end in at number 3, Shocker. Okay, he's not really a forgotten villain, but Herman Schultz's parents died when his younger brother Marty was a boy. From a young age, Schultz turned to a life of crime, and soon realized that he wasn't really good at it, having been arrested several times. After one particular robbery gone wrong, Herman was arrested again, but was sent to the prison workshop, where he used the resources around him to build projects and build gauntlets that sent out shock waves which quickly opened safes as well, giving him a much needed one-up on the authorities. Now, I know what you're thinking, okay? Why am I talking about Shocker? Everyone knows who he is. Well, have you seen the MCU version of this guy? Okay, we need a better one. Come on, give me an actual Shocker. Shocker has the ability to shock his enemies with his handheld vibro shock units, but because the vibrations were so fierce, he has to wear a heavily insulated suit, which kind of looks like a mattress, but still. During his first outing as the self-styled Shocker, he ran into and defeated Spider-Man. Plus, I mean, he's the Shocker, I shock people. Give me a better version, okay? With his seemingly minute introduction into the MCU, I want to see a better version. Do it! Penultimately, in at number 2, The Swarm. Fritz von Meyer was once a fascist scientist, the details of which remain unrevealed. But von Meyer fled Germany at the end of World War II to settle in South America. A work expert on toxic poisons and apiculture, which is beekeeping, he continued his research on the breeding patterns of killer bees. One day, he found a hive unlike any other he had ever seen. The bees exhibited no fear and were unusually passive, and seemed to have a highly developed sense of intelligence. Believing that a nearby meteorite bombardment had somehow mutated these bees, von Meyer built a device that he hoped would reawaken the bees' killer instincts so that they could serve him. However, when they were no longer passive, they began to swarm all over von Meyer, killing him. In the midst of his death, though, his consciousness was shredded, dissipating into the swarms of bees. Thus, von Meyer became an aggregate being, like a living embodiment of the swarm. Kind of like Spider-Man, but with bees. This is probably one of the weirdest but most fascinating villains I've ever seen, and certainly deserves a comeback. However, not as much as number 1, but I gotta admit, being named Fritz and then having your agony possess a whole load of bees, that's getting too close to FNAF for me, okay? I don't like it. Finally, in at number 1, Spider Carnage. We all knew this was going to be on the list, at least if you know me and my favorite Spider-Man villains. However, Spider Carnage isn't just a Spider-Man villain, he's an alternate version of Spider-Man. Hailing from one of the many Earths, this character was introduced in the 90s Spider-Man animated series, my favorite Spider-Man animated series, might I add. This Peter's life was actually very similar to the main Spider-Man, except this version also lost Aunt May and developed a resentment for humanity. And then he had to deal with a clone, which definitely sucked. Until he and the clone everyone learned that the one who they thought was the clone, who was going by Ben Reilly at the time, could actually be the real Peter Parker, and that broke this Peter. A Carnage symbiote from another universe actually sensed this hatred and resentment, and through a portal created by Jonathan Ohm, it bonded with this Peter, driving him even more insane, and then started calling himself Spider Carnage. From my understanding, this character hasn't been seen since that final episode of the series, and I want him to make a comeback. Please, add this character to the MCU. Like, if we're getting 3 Spider-Man, why not just throw Carnage from some other universe in there too, and then have him bond with like Tobey's, because apparently Tobey's a bad person now. Even though I'm dressed like the Spider-Man 3 version, yes, that's exactly why I wore this suit today. Specifically for that reason, but yeah.
Number 10, Doctor Doom. I love Doctor Doom, he just looks so cute, but of course this is still a Doctor Doom alternate, so I imagine they're still quite menacing. Doctor Doom is just what he sounds like, an anthropomorphic duck who also happens to have a similar appearance and attitude to Doctor Doom of Earth 616. He makes an appearance as an adversary in the first issue of Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham. Being a cartoon version of Doctor Doom, aka Victor Von Doom, Doctor Doom also hails from the reality of Spider-Hams, Earth 8311. We also learn in his first appearance that against his own will or his own interests, Doctor Doom happens to be a well-liked rock star, becoming famous against his wishes. He was trying to create his own rock group and make money off of them, but instead he ended up in the limelight despite his protests. Number 9, Killer Kravinoffs. The Killer Kravinoffs are the grandchildren of Kraven the Hunter from the dystopian post-apocalyptic reality of Old Man Logan and Old Man Hawkeye, Earth 807128. With Kraven no longer around to hunt, in his place are his grandchildren. There are 3 of them, but only one ends up actually getting a name. Sadly, their existence in the comics is short-lived for how cool they look and should be as descendants of Kraven. They only appear in one issue of Old Man Hawkeye, showing up in issue number 4. They run into Marshall Bullseye there and actually end up getting killed by him. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about even more alternate villains, there are so many alternate Spider-Man villains I could tell you about, so be sure to hit that like button. Number 8, Karn. Karn ends up becoming the Great Weaver, an ally to the Spider Totems in the end. Spider Totems are spider-like superpowered beings who actually receive their powers through fate rather than circumstance, as we were initially led to believe with heroes like Spider-Man. Karn was a member of the Inheritors, a coven of energy vampires who feed on various animal kingdom totems such as the spider variety. Spider Totems. After Karn was blamed for the death of his mother, he was made to work to atone his misdeeds. He traveled around various multiverses hunting down spider totems at the behest of the other Inheritors, though he never really enjoyed it and thus was a reluctant villain. When the previous Master Weaver ended up dead, Karn decided to take his place and instead became an ally to the Spider Army as opposed to a villain of theirs. He did however kill spider totems back when he was hunting and working for the Inheritors, and a member of the Inheritors really. Like his fellow Inheritors, Karn hails from the reality of Earth 001 and Loom World, which is their home world. Number 7, Morlun. Not only has Morlun proven himself to be a formidable foe in various storylines, with him taking on all of the Spider-Verse twice in the Spider-Verse event and Spider-Geddon in the comics, in addition to taking out multiple Spider-Folks / Spider Totems along the way, but he also went toe-to-toe with Spider-Man in the other. The worst thing / I guess best thing for Morlun fans about this story is how Morlun doesn't just ever go for the 1-2 knockout. Morlun seems to prefer drawing out his victory, teasing his victim if you will, and enjoying Spider-Man's suffering. It's probably because Morlun's used to winning so much, he's used to devouring spider totems, so he's like, we'll just let this play out. At one point, Morlun devours Spider-Man's eye in a fight and beats him to within an inch of his life. However, while this definitely feels like a victorious moment for Morlun and Spider-Man was beat here, he would eventually recover, meaning that Morlun didn't get a straight victory over Spider-Man. In fact, he'd even heal his eye back. But of course, villainous victories rarely ever get to be permanent, so I think we still need to count this one. Number 6, the Lizard. While Lizard doesn't do anything crazy like succeed in completely killing Spider-Man or anything like that, he does beat him in the race against time to save his friend, Dr. Curt Connors, who, is also the Lizard. In the story Shed, the lizard ends up taking over before Spider-Man can get there to try and stop it. Spider-Man arrives far too late, as the lizard seems to have permanently gained dominance after devouring Kurt Connors' son against his own will. This victory would be one that would not only haunt Spider-Man, but the Doctor as well. He would end up finding a way to cure himself of his lizard brain, but become stuck in his lizard form, kept in a containment cell for his crimes, but unable to bring himself to reveal Spider-Man that he had finally cured himself mentally of his reptilian half. This whole thing is just like a super big lizard win in my mind, because even when Connors frees himself of the lizard, he's still stuck in the lizard form, and he still is like, I feel too guilty to even be able to tell people what's really going on. So the lizard really won, even though he was gone. Number 5, Mysterio. Mysterio recently got a pretty big win in the MCU, in typical Mysterio style, I must say. While he hasn't been doing too hot in the comics lately, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in Spider-Man Far From Home, Mysterio managed to earn Spider-Man's trust and even infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D., making them believe he was a hero from an alternate world. I'm not going to lie, even I personally wanted to believe it. It turned out this was not true, and while his backstory was a little different here, Mysterio here was still a master at illusion and a full-on villain. In the end, Quentin Beck would seemingly die during a confrontation with Spider-Man, but it turns out he had one more trick up his sleeve. And at the end of the film, we see a video recording of Beck that incriminates Spider-Man and also reveals his true identity as Peter Parker. He's going to be in a lot of trouble in the next movie, I think. Number 4, Kraven. Kraven's Last Hunt is a story that forever sticks out in comic book history. Especially in Spider-Man's history, it is a dark tale where Kraven finally captures his most prized prey, Spider-Man. What's more, it's also implied he kills Spidey. He then proceeds to take Spider-Man's place, proving once and for all that not only is he capable of capturing and killing the hero, but also aiming to prove that he's better than Spider-Man by beating down all his villains brutally. In the end, we learn that Spider-Man was not actually dead, but in a comatose, death-like state all this while. He returns, and Kraven acknowledges that while he seemingly won to do what Spider-Man does while keeping to his moral code is actually an impressive feat. Something that Kraven likely wouldn't actually be able to do. His final hunt complete, it's then implied that Kraven takes his own life. Number 3, Kingpin. There are a few times that Kingpin has beaten Spider-Man throughout the comics and alternate universes that we have explored. At one point, he actually manages to kill MJ in a what-if version of Back in Black, and while Spider-Man manages to hunt him down and even kills him, in the end, Kingpin's actions turn Spider-Man into a villain. So I'd still consider that a win for Kingpin. But what I'd really like to focus on here is the time that Kingpin managed to kill Spider-Man in Sony's groundbreaking animated film Into the Spider-Verse, one of my favorite films of all time. Here, Kingpin manages to actually kill Peter Parker, the current Spider-Man of Miles Morales' universe. Although Miles would also learn of alternate universes with their own Spider-Men, Spider-Girls, and even Spider-Pigs. He would also learn of his newfound powers and himself have to protect the city as a new Spider-Man. But still, when it came to the Peter Parker of his reality, Kingpin killed him. He dead. He dead. So dead. Never coming back. Number 2, Dr. Octopus. Doc Ock actually succeeds in taking Spider-Man's place, not just by impersonating him, but by actually swapping bodies with the hero. That the two swap bodies, wah 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 wah, with Peter ending up stuck in the dying form of Doc Ock, and Doc Ock's mind now within the young and superpowered body of Spider-Man. Oh my goodness. Eventually, he would relinquish this form, giving it back to Peter when he realized he was incapable of making the tough decisions required of a more heroic spirit. But for a time, we'd come to know this version of villain and hero combined as Superior Spider-Man. And if you're wondering, but wait a minute, didn't Peter die in Doc Ock's body? Yes, but also his consciousness lived still on in his mind. It's a little confusing, but if you read it, it makes sense. It's like comic book confusing, just if you are explaining it quickly to someone in a list. Number 1, Green Goblin. You can take Peter's body, you can take his mind, you can ruin his reputation, but one of the worst things you can ever do to him is to break his heart. There are many ghosts that haunt Peter Parker, but one of the most meaningful ones to this day remains that of Gwen Stacy. Gwen was Peter's childhood sweetheart. Before he and MJ were together and were a thing, he was with Gwen, who was also a science enthusiast and academic like Peter. Gwen ended up being taken hostage by the Green Goblin and thrown from a bridge. When Peter as Spider-Man went to save her with his web shooters, it's implied that his own attempt to do so was what killed her. The tension from his web caused her neck to snap. Norman Osborn has remained one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains to this day, and for many, the moment Green Goblin killed Gwen Stacy was where this shift really happened for his character, making him Spider-Man's greatest and most feared nemesis.
And at 10, Sin Eater. Stanley Carter's parents were addicts who ended up falling in love with each other. Stanley's father, though, later died, leaving Stanley's mother pregnant and alone. Stanley's mother was sent to a rehabilitation clinic, and Stanley went to be raised by his grandparents in the Ozark Mountains. Stanley's grandfather was a zealous pastor who reveled his son and took it out on Stanley. After Stanley's grandfather died due to a rattler bite, this congregation held a sin-eating ritual for him, and young Stanley presumably saw a sin eater, a masked hermit who would eat fruit placed in the corpse of someone's body to take the dead sins for himself, because you know that's not gonna screw up a child's development. Stanley ended up joining the NYPD and became a detective after growing up, having multiple instances of executing criminals, particularly drug traffickers, including his own partner. This is where he really became the Sin Eater, a maniacal serial killer and probably one of Spider-Man's scariest foes with no powers, but with the MO of killing anyone who sins. The Sin Eater's first victim was actually his own lover, police captor Jean DeWolf, whose death attracted attention throughout all New York City, including their friend Spider-Man. The Sin Eater had stolen DeWolf's purse, creating a precedent of taking one personal object for each of his victims, and this object would usually have to be associated with the victim's sin in some way. It's probably going to be a loose way, but yeah. And at 9, Atrocity. Introduced and only seen in the Spider-Man game Spider-Man Edge of Time from 2011, Atrocity was created after Anti-Venom went into a blind rage, accidentally knocked Otto Octavius and Walker Sloan into Walker Sloan's gateway. It was like a time gateway. The three fused in the space-time continuum. I tried getting Taylor to put this on a list for ages, so I'm gonna put it here because holy damn, this is one hell of a villain that I want to see come back. Atrocity would occasionally attack Peter Parker or Miguel O'Hara with its teleporting tentacles throughout their journey in Alchemax's building, until it eventually revealed itself and attacked Peter Parker. Atrocity was defeated but would later appear again, attempting to kill Peter Parker at the same time the CEO was fighting Miguel O'Hara. Peter manipulated Atrocity into attacking electrified pillars, stunning it. Peter took this opportunity to remove those tentacles and send them through the time gateway. These tentacles were also used to drain the Alchemax CEO of his powers. After both Atrocity and the CEO, who is revealed to be Peter Parker, were vulnerable, they were knocked into the gateway together simultaneously, resetting the timeline. This absolute monstrosity is able to teleport through time and space, in addition to all of his other powers. So yeah, Atrocity for sure needs to make a comeback. I want to see this guy. He only appeared once. He's probably one of the most horrifying looking villains of all time. Please. And at 8, Mr. Negative. Martin Lee was a seemingly good-willed philanthropist who ran a volunteer soup kitchen called Feast, where May Parker volunteered, because of course she did. While he was also the crime boss of Chinatown, Mr. Negative. Despite being a crime lord, Lee was seemingly a kind and generous man. The Feast project displayed healing powers for people of various illnesses, although the cause of this healing was actually unknown, but it turned out to be Lee himself. The public knows that the person known as Martin Lee was an illegal Chinese immigrant who attempted to travel to America to be with his wife. In China, he ran a factory, but because of his lack of resources to bribe the Communist Party, he could not develop his business and grew tired of that country. Although this Martin Lee is not actually Martin Lee, but a former smuggler who just used Lee's identity after he died. Mr. Negative first came into conflict with Spider-Man when he made a power play towards taking control of New York's criminal underworld by attempting to wipe out all existing members of the Criminali and Mafia crime families, using a DNA-specific bioweapon called Devil's Breath. Mr. Negative is also responsible for the creation of Anti-Venom, and while he was featured in the 2018 Spider-Man game, it's been like 3 years, so he needs to show up again. And at 7, Spider-Side. Spider-Side is a more obscure and odd Spider-Man villain that I still think would give the hero a run for his money nowadays. Being first introduced as Spider-Side in New Warriors number 61, this version of Peter Parker is one of the clones made by Dr. Miles Warren, an entirely separate villain that caused the whole clone debacle and the introduction of Ben Reilly and the Scarlet Spider. But what's notable about Spider-Side is not only him having all of Spider-Man's powers, but also the ability to stretch and warp his body at will, similar to Mr. Fantastic. Spider-Side is certainly deadly as well, helping Jackal to release a virus in Springfield, Pennsylvania, which resulted in the deaths of over 2,600 people, which Homer Simpson was definitely not happy about. But either way, Spider-Side with all the abilities of Spider-Man and Mr. Fantastic makes him pretty damn powerful for a villain that not really many people know about. And at 6, Kraven the Hunter. Karanoff found that he had a great talent for finding employment in Kenya, Africa. Karanoff began his career using the typical tools of the hunter, but over time he developed a preference to take down large animals with his bare hands. So, you know, already a psycho in the making. After meeting a voodoo witch doctor named Calypso, Karanoff took a herbal potion which enhanced his physical powers and gave him strength, speed, and senses to match a jungle cat. The potion also extended his life greatly, keeping his health and vitality for years to come. At some point, the notion of big game hunting became a bore to the hunter, so his associate Chameleon, who was later revealed to be his half-brother, proposed to Kraven that he hunt Spider-Man, and thus gave Kraven a new purpose in life. Kraven gained additional powers by drinking more rare and exotic jungle elixirs given to him by his voodoo priestess lover Calypso. These elixirs gave him the strength and speed of a savage beast, and all the better to catch Spider-Man with, right? Despite being assisted by the Chameleon, his scheme failed and he was deported from the US, but he would definitely come back. Halfway through into number 5, Toxin. Born from Carnage as the 1000th symbiote in its lineage, Toxin was feared to be the strongest and most dangerous of their race by both Venom and Carnage. Shortly after being born, the symbiote united with police officer Pat Mulligan. Years later, the symbiote was removed from Mulligan by Blackheart, who beat Pat Mulligan to death in a gutter. With the help of Venom, Jack-o'-lantern took it to its boss, Crime Master. Crime Master, though, found the perfect host in Eddie Brock, who he forced to become Toxin's host. You know, Eddie Brock, the former host of Venom. After bonding with Eddie, Toxin took over its host and worked with the Savage Six, attacking its grandfather symbiote Venom. And with Toxin seemingly coming to the big screen in the future, being introduced in Let There Be Carnage, okay, well, Pat Mulligan was introduced, and then he had some like freaky thing happen with his eyes near the end of the movie, but still, it's very close to it. This guy is also just a freaking freak, okay? He can grow fangs and claws when he's angry. It just happens. It's not something that he thinks of, it just happens. Something that Venom and Carnage are unable to do. However, Toxin is also unable to be tracked by Venom or Carnage, as well as being immune to Spider-Man's spider sense. So this dude is hella off the radar, which only makes things freakier. And at 4, Anti-Venom. When Eddie Brock separated from the Venom symbiote, traces of it were still left in his body. Later though, suffering from cancer, Brock started working as a volunteer in the Feast Center. Martin Lee, the founder of Feast, and the alter ego of the supervillain Mr. Negative, used his powers to cure Eddie's cancer. But in the process, Lee accidentally infused the remnants of the symbiote in Eddie's bloodstream with his power, and fused them to his white blood cells, creating a new hybrid symbiote which manifested when the Venom symbiote attempted to leave its then current host Matt Gargan and return to Eddie. This new symbiote, dubbed Anti-Venom by Eddie, demonstrated tremendous healing powers and other powers that differ from the Venom symbiote, as well as having an inverted color scheme, or a negative color scheme, if you will, such as producing antibodies that can cure any known disease and removing any other impurities within a human body. Unlike other symbiotes though, this symbiote is completely mindless, and Eddie Brock is in full control of its actions. This symbiote was destroyed when it was used as the cure for the spider virus, which had turned various characters into human spider hybrids. However, it was remade as Agent Anti-Venom after Flash Thompson ended up getting soaked with Anti-Venom serum. That's a whole other story.
Number 3, Spider Carnage. Similar to the Spider on part 1 of our list, Spider Carnage is another evil alternate version of Peter Parker, or at least he thinks he's Peter Parker. Spider Carnage came into being following Miles Warren cloning Peter. In this reality, Peter lost his Uncle Ben and later also his Aunt May, which left him completely brokenhearted. His state of mind was only made worse when he was made to believe the version who had escaped Miles, dyeing his hair blonde and taking up the name Ben Reilly, might actually be the true Peter Parker, with Peter potentially being the clone. This revelation filled Peter with hatred for Ben, and would later fuel the bond he had with the Carnage symbiote, who entered into his world via an interdimensional portal during a time when Peter fought Ben. His rage and the symbiote turned him into a villain known as Spider Carnage, and his plan was to destroy all realities across the multiverse. This version of Spider Carnage appeared in the 90s animated Spider-Man television series. Number 2. Red Goblin. Red Goblin isn't necessarily an alternate variant considering he is the main reality 616 Norman Osborn, but Superior Spider-Man is also technically Earth 616's Otto Octavius, and I counted him last time without much complaint, so I figured we could put Red Goblin on this list and it should be fine. Red Goblin is a villain that comes from a period in Marvel Comics where a depowered Norman Osborn ended up getting his hands on the Carnage symbiote and convincing it to bond with him, with both of them bonding over how they enjoyed hurting and tormenting people. Yikes. The Carnage symbiote also helped to cure Norman Osborn of the antidote that was blocking him from using the Goblin serum to regain his previous power set. So this version comes with both the powers of Carnage and those of Green Goblin. Plus you get the brilliant and twisted minds of Norman and Carnage combined. Who doesn't want Red Goblin? He's such a cool villain. Put him in Across the Spider-Verse! Number 1. Evil Spider-Man Army. With the potential for characters like Patton Parnell, Spider Carnage, Earth 65's Lizard, Ultimatum, Superior Spider-Man, The Spider, and Peter Parker 2099 to show up, it seems plausible that we could get a whole Evil Spider-Man army, or Evil Spider Army, in Across the Spider-Verse. I don't know about you, but I'd love to see some Evil Spider-Men team up to take on the heroic Spider-Folks we've come to know and love from the previous film and beyond in the comics. I think that would be super cool. The reality is, in the multiverse, we don't even need an external threat. The threat could simply be Spider-Man himself, considering there are so many great evil possibilities that appear throughout the catalog of Marvel's multiversal realities.
An intense shocker. Herman Schultz's parents died when his younger brother Marty was a boy. From a young age, Schultz turned to a life of crime. However, he soon realized that he wasn't really good at it, having been arrested several times. After one robbery gone wrong, he got arrested again, but was sent to a prison workshop, where he used the resources around him to build gauntlets that sent out shock waves which quickly opened safes as well, giving himself a one-up on the authorities, a much needed one. Now I know what you're thinking, but how could a guy named Herman be any form of powerful? Well, the Shocker had the ability to shock his enemies with his handheld vibro shock units. But because the vibrations were so fierce, he wore a heavily insulated suit, and during his first outing as the self-styled Shocker, he ran into and defeated Spider-Man. Plus, I mean, he's the Shocker. He shocks people. In at 9, Hydro Man. Morris Bench was born and raised in the Bronx, New York. He began working as a crewman on a cargo ship, but he was accidentally knocked overboard by Spider-Man while a powerful experimental generator was being lowered into the ocean for testing. Exposed to the energy conversion process of the generator while being bombarded with volcanic gas, Bench's cellular structure was altered. When he was rescued from the depths, though, his body began extruding great quantities of some watery substance, which Bench first attributed to just being sweat. Annoyed by the incessant dripping, Bench went to a local pub to stir up trouble, finding none, but he was astonished to learn that he could convert his entire physical form into basically water. While he may just be a form of Sandman, being able to convert to water instead of sand, he certainly seems more powerful to me. There is water basically everywhere, and our bodies are made of 70% water, so if Bench was able to tap into the water that is in his enemies' bodies, that would be a freaking nightmare. Not to mention a horrible sight. And it ain't the Kingpin. A crime boss is one thing. A crime boss that to the public is a well-respected philanthropist and businessman is something else. Especially a businessman who is like 300 pounds of muscle. Wilson Fisk is an absolute madman who runs most of the New York and Las Vegas criminal underworld. However, things get even more intense after his wife is killed so that he doesn't retire. After the murder of his wife, not only did he resume leadership of his former organization, but he also turned over the files on other criminal leaders to law enforcement through the costumed crime fighter of Daredevil, now with the motive of ridding himself of any rivals, and the ploy actually worked, and as a result of the evidence in the files, many crime leaders, both inside and outside the Magia, were convicted. In the ensuing power vacuum, the Kingpin rebuilt his coalition stronger than before. He moved on to control a great majority of non-Magia East Coast gangs dealing in conventional crimes, and the Kingpin's organization became stronger than any single Magia family in the New York area, media could ever withstand. We love a savvy businessman.
Number 7. Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative is back, baby! Initially, he was cleansed of all his sins by Sin Eater, as his Martin Lee persona wanted to be fully free of Mr. Negative, his darker or negative half. However, after Sin Eater's cleansings were undone, Mr. Negative returned and attempted to take over Martin Lee once more. After calling on the inner demons who threatened to harm Aunt May in Lee's presence, he surrendered himself and became Mr. Negative once again. Kingpin, it seems, has allied himself with Mr. Negative and has also returned his former territories of NYC to him to rule over. Number 6. Mysterio. Mysterio is a villain who recently got a boost when he made his way to the big screen, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. There he was Quentin Beck, a man who used to work for Tony Stark creating tech, but after being humiliated by him, he set out to rewrite his story and make himself a hero. To do this, however, he would need to face some pretty big monsters and would need access to some pretty massive amounts of tech to pull off the illusion of him doing so. He tricked Peter Parker and ultimately Talos and his partner, who were disguised as Nick Fury and Maria Hill respectively, and were actually working for the real Fury, and ended up gaining access to a network of Stark drones and satellites the world over, which Tony Stark had bequeathed control of to Peter Parker originally after his death. Even after he was defeated in Far From Home, Mysterio still managed to come out on top in the end when he somehow, from beyond the grave, leaked Spider-Man's true identity to the world. I really don't believe he's dead. And also made Spider-Man look like a complete villain who had killed the heroic Mysterio. In the comics, Mysterio seemingly perishes only to return once more, claiming to be actually good this time, but of course, it's Mysterio, so he can never really be trusted, can he? And if you want to check out that whole thing, you should go check out Sinister War issue number 1. Number 5. Vulture. The Vulture is another villain who also got a pretty big boost from making his way to the big screen in the first Spider-Man MCU film, Homecoming. In this movie, he's played by Michael Keaton, who absolutely delivered when it came to his version of Adrian Toomes, a down-on-his-luck salvage company owner who, after losing a major contract, is forced to turn to a life of crime to provide for his family. I actually really loved this version of Vulture. It was so good. Vulture then maybe gets a little carried away with that whole side hustle, becoming, you guessed it, a supervillain. Not only is Adrian still out there in the world and still a great threat to Peter as he actually knows his secret identity, but it's also been implied in the Morbius trailers that he might have found his way out of prison. In the comics, Vulture is currently leading the Savage Six, one of the multiple Sinister Six teams headed Spider-Man's way. Or at least in Spider-Man's vicinity. All these Sinister Sixes have their own motives, but they're all going to be at least fighting around Spider-Man, I think. Spider-Man's definitely going to be there and be like, oh, I don't want to deal with this. Number 4. Norman Osborn. Green Goblin, Red Goblin, Goblin King, or just Norman Osborn. Whatever name he's going by at the time, Norman Osborn still remains one of the most powerful Spider-Man villains that we've ever seen. Remember when he threatened not just Peter Parker, but pretty much all the heroes and civilians of Earth during Dark Reign, when he became the head of a new organization he'd created to replace S.H.I.E.L.D., Hammer? Not to mention, he also became the Iron Patriot, aka the Iron Man stand-in of his own Dark Avengers team. Of course, lately he's been taking a bit of a back seat as he's more focused on working to help his son Harry Osborn, who is currently taking over the reins in Spider-Man as one of the main big bads currently. Well, kind of. It's complicated. Still, you can't deny the years of history between Norman and Peter and how much Norman Osborn has tried to drive Spider-Man insane. And so for that fact, we still gotta put him, I think, pretty high up on the list, because you can't erase that history. Number 3. Kindred. Kindred was hinted at in the comics more than a decade before he made his comic book debut in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, Issue 5. He is maybe one of the best villains because he is still so shrouded in mystery. We don't know a lot about him. In fact, I'm not even sure if he is a he. Could end up being a she. We don't really know. This villain can control and create centipedes and is a demon spawn. In life, he was someone who was close to Peter Parker, hence his codename Kindred. Kindred spirit, get it? He affectionately has referred to Peter as Pete. All we know so far is that he's out for blood when it comes to Norman Osborn, and also has a grudge against Pete for some reason as well. He was also powerful and terrifying enough to have had Mysterio pledge loyalty to him. So you know, like kind of a bigger bad than Mysterio. Mysterio's pretty big bad, pretty big. Number 2, Dr. Octopus. Well, Dr. Octopus is one of the oldest and most iconic Spider-Man villains around. I know y'all were about to be like, but wait, Dr. Octopus, he came out in issue 3. Though Chameleon actually was first, came out in issue 1, there was an amazing alternate version of him that needs to be acknowledged. In Into the Spider-Verse, we got to meet a female version of Doc Ock known as Olivia Octavius. So why do we love her? Well, because she is terrifying, brilliant, has a great character design, and is voiced by Kathryn Hahn. And because she was also unexpected. When you're making superhero movies or even writing comics today, it's hard to keep things feeling fresh and unpredictable. And this was honestly something I myself was not expecting when I was watching the movie. I also just love that she has kind of like a Tom Baker's Doctor Who vibe going on with her headband and her scarf. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I just felt like it was cool. Maybe I'm just imagining things because I love Doctor Who too much. You asked for the newest villains and you got it. Cadaverous first appeared in the 2019 Spider-Man series co-written by J.J. Abrams and his son Henry Abrams. It's an experience. Cadaverous is a combination of technology and organic parts, a human face and almost human mind, albeit one that seems to struggle to speak properly. Takes him forever to get a sentence out. Make up this huge cybernetic monster. In the first issue, we handily see him defeat Peter as Spider-Man and kill MJ, leaving their son Ben to grow up moody and without his mom, and sort of without his dad, who abandoned him. He's got a hook hand, you know, life is hard. It now seems that Cadaverous has a villainous plot, and that young Ben and possibly his absentee hook-handed father Peter will have to work together to unravel and eventually stop said plot. Oh yeah, and he's also got an army of robots.
Coming in at number 10, we have Frogman. I mean, if you don't have any powers, you don't have to commit to a super lame animal. Frogman is Eugene Petilio. There was a time when he took his frog suit and he tried to take on some of the hardest hitting street level Marvel heroes. More than once did he come face to face with Spidey, and every time he was taken into the dirt almost immediately. And it's not hard to figure out why. The guy built a suit where the only power was how high he could jump. Like, if you're going to get your powers from some sort of accident or you're born with them, then you don't have a choice. You have to stick with whatever your weird power is. That's your life. But if you're building a power, then you can be whoever you want. Why would you choose frogs? There are so many other creatures you could go with. Like the Falcon. Even though he's not the coolest hero of all time, he's a million times cooler than the dude who hops around and tries to cause some havoc. On the bright side, Eugene's son eventually takes on the mantle of the frog suit and tries to be a hero, but on the downside, Eugene's son sucks at being a hero as much as his dad sucks at being a villain. So in the end, the family was doomed to be on the sidelines. I would like to see one of those what if comics where Frogman becomes the greatest hero of all time.
Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see some more, make sure you hit that like button. Number 9, the Trapster. His name is Peter Petruski, and I can't believe how long he's been around. Marvel has him come back again and again, despite the fact that he's got no powers other than this weird paste gun. He invented a super adhesive liquid paste, and loves using it for evil. He's redesigned his costume multiple times, always ridiculous and far too proud of himself, but he has definitely been around. He appears in multiple stories and has gone up against the likes of Daredevil, Fantastic Four, and of course Spider-Man. All with just a goo gun. He is hired by Red Skull at one point and even has a run-in with Ghost Rider. His paste was once confused for Spider-Man's webbing, and Trapster was furious to see Spidey getting credit in the newspaper for his crimes. Trapster is undeniably lame, but he's obviously got some fans because he's been around so long, so we'll leave him here at number 9. Lame, but not the worst.
And coming in at number 8, we have Stegron, the Dinosaur Man. Once again, if you get to pick your powers, maybe you should shoot a little higher than being a species that already went extinct. They already lost the battle with nature. You think they will be able to take down superheroes? Stegron was originally Dr. Vincent Stegron. He was a scientist who took a liking to the serum which turned Kirk Connors into the Lizard Man, and he decided he would up the ante a little bit. He mixed the formula with dinosaur DNA and then shot it all up inside his body and turned into a dinosaur-human hybrid. He then went on to try and make an army of dinosaurs to try and take over the world, but was taken down by a force he didn't expect. It was winter. Dinosaurs are cold-blooded apparently, so when winter came around, they all went to sleep, including Stegron. If you're picking your superpower, you should go with something that can handle temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius. Unless you're in Florida or something. If you're down there, you can build the biggest dinosaur army you want, and the state would probably be fine with it.
Number 7, Slide. This guy was a chemical engineer who created a chemical coating that eliminated all friction between that object and surfaces. He's like the opposite of Trapster. He invented the ultimate lubricant. Then this evil tycoon buys up the company that he works for and shuts down the lab. Slide, aka Jalome Beecher, was going to build his own company founded on the non-stick solution he invented, but no bank was willing to give him a loan. So he did what anybody would do and decides to rob the bank. He makes himself a costume out of this material and, free from the clutches of friction, is able to zip around skating on the ground up to 30 miles per hour and can't be stopped, not by people's grabbing hands or even Spider-Man's sticky webbing. Now, this isn't exactly the most lame villain, but the idea of the slippery criminal sliding all over the place just doesn't really do it for me. Where's the stakes? Spidey could just wait for this guy to slip and fall off of a cliff or into oncoming traffic, or they could just have him slip and slide right into a jail cell. I'll say one thing, the way that he zips all over the place in the comic panels looks like a lot of fun. Number 6, the Walrus. With big wet flippers and menacing tusks and the blood-curdling cries of "Arf, arf," it's easy to see how terrifying a walrus-based supervillain could be. This guy is not. Hubert Carpenter was created when his uncle, a janitor, tried again and again to give Hubert powers. They exhausted the names of animals he could have the proportionate strength of all the way through the alphabet till they got to the letter W. He was totally stumped and then became inspired by a poster of the Beatles and becomes the Walrus. He goes on a classic spree of mass destruction, eventually seeing Beast lecturing at a university and decides to attack him to prove that he's the greatest product of modern science. Hilariously enough, it's actually Frogman who gets the credit for taking him down later, and this really gets the blubber boiling. Spider-Man can't help laughing when he meets this guy and winds up taking him down for the second time with just a tap of his finger.
Number 5, Plant Man. Samuel Smithers was obsessed with plants and even studied them throughout his jobs. He wanted to invent a device that allowed communication between plants and humans. He had been working on this ray gun that he thought could actually make it work and create this open line of communication. It was only when it was hit by lightning when it actually got the ability to control plants. You know, he had superhuman strength and he has the ability to communicate and control plants. After he placed Captain America in a coma with his invention Pretty Poison, he got the attention of Spider-Man, who teamed up with the Falcon to take down Plant Man and get the cure for Captain America. Number 4, Grizzly. Maxwell Markham, aka Grizzly, is quite the strange supervillain. Basically, he looks like an actual grizzly bear in this mechanical suit. His story is that he used to be a wrestler until J. Jonah Jameson ruined his career with one article, which was the reason why he lost his license to be a pro wrestler. He wanted revenge on the man who ruined his career and later attacked the Daily Bugle. Spider-Man showed up and was able to take down Grizzly and sent him straight to prison. Grizzly had super strength, durability, and super sharp claws. Number 3, Kangaroo. Before Frank Oliver became the Kangaroo, he was just some guy who loved studying kangaroo back at his home of Australia. He used to be a boxer, but he got kicked out for how he fought and really hurt one of his other opponents. When he made his way over to America, he got quite into trouble and even caught the eye of Spider-Man, since Kangaroo had stolen an armored truck. But Spider-Man was able to apprehend him. Kangaroo later got surgery by Dr. Jonas Harrow, and this is what gave him his powers where he can actually leap like a kangaroo, but a lot higher and much further. Apparently, even before his surgery, he did have kind of some abilities where he could leap more so than the average human, but not to the extent of what the surgery gave him. Number 2, Big Wheel. Jackson Wheel, aka Big Wheel, got the Tinkerer to make him this big armored wheel that would, lead him to become the Big Wheel. This all started because Rocket Racer, someone he hired to find any dirt on himself, wanted more money for something extremely bad that he found on Wheel, something that would ruin his entire job in life. He found out about the Tinkerer from Rocket Racer, which led him to the creation of the armored wheel. He attacked Rocket Racer during a fight with Spider-Man. He almost killed Rocket Racer, but Spider-Man saved him, and then Big Wheel lost control, went into the river, and was later arrested and sent to prison. But don't worry, he was back to a life of crime shortly after that. They always do. Number 1, The Wall. Yes, there was a supervillain named The Wall that has gone up against Spider-Man in the past. And a little fun story, I remember hearing about this villain a few years ago from my friend who was going back and he was reading all of the original Amazing Spider-Man issues. I remember he sent me a picture while he was reading it, and I literally could not stop laughing because his slogan was, "This is one wall you will never crawl." I mean, it's weird, but at the same time, it's kind of amazing. Like, he's definitely one of the most weird and just strange supervillains that Spider-Man has ever gone up against. Okay, so a little backstory. Joshua Waldemeier, wow, had the job of laying bricks down, and one day, an explosion happened and hit a brick wall that had just been built, sending it crashing down and burying him under all these bricks. But didn't kill him. And actually, the bricks merged with his body, which turned him into the wall. Since he was an actual wall, Spider-Man had a hard time affecting him with any and all physical attacks. Spider-Man's web attacks didn't even work on him. But they later found themselves sitting on a bench and just working things out like two grown adults. A grown man spider and a grown man wall.
Number 10, Alchemax. Alchemax is the villainous corporation that exists in the alternate future of 2099, Earth 928. It is where Miguel O'Hara once worked and came up with the procedure that would ultimately grant him his powers. He was a brilliant geneticist that worked for Alchemax, but didn't like that he was being pressured to rush along his research and begin trials that he believed were unethical. When Miguel tried to leave Alchemax after a test subject died from the procedure, the CEO, Tyler Stone, attempted to prevent him from leaving by getting him addicted to a drug only Alchemax produced, called Rapture, which is also apparently a highly addictive substance, so not so great for Miguel. Fortunately, Miguel would end up curing himself, getting spider-like powers, and end up escaping Alchemax, at least for the time being. Alchemax and Stone, however, weren't willing to let him escape so easily, and they would continue to pursue him. It's possible Alchemax could end up being the main big bad of it all in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, and maybe Part 2, and however many other parts there will be. Number 9. Vulture. While I imagine we will get to see some of Miguel O'Hara's villains as we head to the future of 2099, I would also love it if we get to meet some of Spider-Man Noir's as well. In the reality of the Noirverse, Earth 90214, Vulture is actually a terrifying villain who Spider-Man Noir also has a pretty personal vendetta against. In that reality, Vulture is the one who is personally responsible for killing Peter's Uncle Ben. He was ordered by the Green Goblin of the Noirverse to do this, but still, he was ultimately the one responsible. Vulture here is a carnival geek. That is a person who travels around with a carnival and, not having any particular skill sets of their own, usually performs by biting the heads off of live animals. Vulture went down this road and ended up with a very acquired taste for human flesh. As such, he devoured Peter's Uncle Ben. Later on, Spider-Man Noir would kill the Vulture for what he'd done, when he later attempted to kill his Aunt May. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about more amazing multiversal villains and just, spider villains in general, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And let us know if there's anyone in particular you want to learn more about. Number 8. The Lizard. The Lizard of Earth 65 is the version we are talking about here. On Earth 65, the same reality that Spider-Gwen hails from in the comics, Lizard is actually none other than Peter Parker. Peter Parker is best friends with Gwen Stacy, and after she becomes the spider-like superpowered hero in this reality, in his place, he wants nothing more than to be like her. He does not know, of course, that this hero, his hero, is actually his friend Gwen. Done with being bullied and having to have Gwen stick up for him as well, he creates a serum which he uses on himself. It gives him power, but it also turns him into the monster and villain known as Lizard, as his reptile self takes over. The Lizard ends up dying when he comes up against Spider-Gwen, and is only then revealed to be Peter Parker, Gwen's best friend. He dies in her arms. It's all pretty tragic. We saw an allusion to this part of Gwen and Peter's stories from Earth 65 in Gwen's origin flashback in Into the Spider-Verse. But what if Peter didn't die? What if he's still alive and he somehow returns? That would be intense for Gwen to deal with. Perhaps he's an alternate of this alternate who is still alive, or perhaps, like I said, the Lizard didn't really die in Gwen's universe. There are multiple approaches you could take here. I personally would love to see him come back because I just would love to see their dynamic.
Coming in at number 7, we have Gibbon. We got back-to-back orphanage stories for you. In fact, this one sounds like a cross between Mindworm and Robin. Gibbon is basically the missing link. He has all the abilities of a chimp that are amplified way up. He's got super strength, speed, awareness, reflexes. This guy is off the charts when you're talking about his Madden stats. But because of his monkey-like ways, the kids didn't really like him in the orphanage, and he was never adopted. Now this ended with him growing up and leaving like a regular dude, but now he was just a freak with no money, so he decided he could use his mutations to make some cash. And what's the best way for an oddity to make a quick buck? Well, the circus, of course. There you would think he would be among his people, but he was rejected once again, and now he turned to a life of villainy. When we first see Gibbon, he's just a dude that has some monkey skills, but in later renditions of his character, he looks like a full-on ape man. And even though he has the abilities to take down Spidey, the clashes between the two always end up with Gibbon on his butt. Coming in at number 6, we have the Answer. Now this guy is actually pretty cool. He's just used in a very lame way, and his name sucks. The Answer was already a skilled assassin. He was working for the mob boss of all mob bosses, Wilson Fisk. Anyone Fisk wanted taken down, he was all over it. And part of why he was so good at his job was because the Answer, at this time he was known as Aaron Nichols, is extremely intelligent. He showcases genius level problem solving skills, and he can come up with the answer to any problem. And this is all before he ever gets any sort of superpowers. There was a time in comics when the Kingpin was just handing out superpowers, but you don't give the first powers to someone you can't trust, so he of course gave his first dose of super juice to his buddy Aaron. But at first glance, nothing happened, which is probably a relief and a bummer, because if you take some sort of experimental drug to give yourself powers, you want to get the superpowers, but you also don't want to come out a freak. But later, the Answer learns that he has one of the most powerful superpowers I have ever heard of. No matter what the situation, when he is faced with a conflict, his body will supply him with the powers to counter who or whatever he's fighting. So normally he's just a guy, but when the time calls for it, he can fly or create force fields or get super strength. But after running with Spidey that he wins, the character just kind of disappears and we don't see him that much. This guy fits on this list because of the wasted potential. Coming in at number 5, we have Kangaroo. I brought this up in the first video. If you're a villain or a hero and you're choosing your power, you don't have to pick something lame. It seems like some of these villains focus way too much on the branding of their super persona rather than the powers. With Kangaroo, it seemed that the villain was set on theming themselves after kangaroos rather than having a cool power. He has implants in his legs that allow him to jump very far, and he's also a skilled boxer. Like, not the worst combination of things, but when you're hell bent on taking out Spidey by stomping on him, you're probably going to lose a lot. There was this weird time in the 70s and 80s where Australia was this thing that the media was trying to push. It was foreign, it was interesting, no one really knew how to sell it. The closest that we got was Crocodile Dundee. But this villain seems like the big wigs at Marvel wanted to make an Australian themed villain because they thought kids would like it, rather than thinking of a good character first. Coming in at number 4, we have the Swarm. Have you guys seen that episode of South Park where they make a joke that the writers from Family Guy are just manatees in a tank and they all pull out 3 random topics to base an episode around? Well, that's what the Swarm feels like. They were like German scientists, killer bees, purple cape. This dude is lame, not only because he's a swarm of bees that is being controlled by a dead scientist's consciousness, but also because this dude gets beat by bug repellent. When him and Spidey face off, Spidey's able to beat him by spraying down his suit in bug spray, and then the Swarm literally can't get close enough to fight and has to run away. If your weakness can be purchased at Home Depot, then you're a pretty lame villain if you ask me. Coming in at number 3, we have Grizzly. I like how in the Marvel universe, if you're a bear enthusiast, you'll eventually get superpowers and become one of the lamest villains that Peter Parker has to fight on a semi-regular basis. But if you're a bear enthusiast in real life, you just get eaten by bears. 2 very different outcomes. Well, Maxwell Markham was just that, a dude who loves bears, and get this, he was also a wrestler who hurt his fellow wrestlers too much, so he got kicked out of the league. We got a dude who loves bears, he used to be a wrestler. What's the third thing that's going to set this guy into the manatee formula? Oh, he was also given a bear suit that would hook him up with some superpowers. Where did he get this suit? Well, he got it from the Jackal, who's one of Spider-Man's best villains, but that dude has a lot of dud moves. I feel like the Jackal just wakes up some days and is like, what if I gave a dude a bear suit so he thought he was a real villain and then Spider-Man would have to deal with it? That would be jokes. Some of his plots sound more like pranks than actual schemes to cause mayhem. Coming in at number 2, we have Hypno Hustler. Next, we have a villain that not only has a lame weakness, but their powers were used to such a small scale that doesn't really make any sense why this character was ever made. Hypno Hustler is Anthony Del Soin. And he has music that can take over your mind. His songs allow him to control people around him and then they do his bidding. But the thing is, if he hears his own music, he will also become hypnotized. He can't even handle his own groovy music, which seems strange. I've never heard of a hypnotist hypnotizing themselves. But when we first see Hypno Hustler, he's shaking people down for just their pocket change at a show. I feel like this guy should have had bigger dreams. If he got one of his songs on the radio, he could have taken over the world. And coming at the #1 spot, we have Humbug. Here's the thing, when you hear that there's a hero based off a spider, that's kinda cool, because at least spiders are scary, they make web, they do some interesting things. But when you hear there's a villain that just has a general insect theme, you can throw that one in the trash. I really couldn't dislike this villain more. For one, he should be able to beat Spider-Man because he's got a super suit that gives him skills that are on par with the web slinger. But this guy has the worst weakness of all, a love for bugs. He loves bugs so much that Spider-Man has been able to halt this guy from a life of crime by telling him he's going to smash some cockroaches. Like, dude, give your head a shake.
Number 10. White Rabbit. White Rabbit is Lorena Dodson, and while she might seem like kind of a joke villain, we've seen some pretty dark storylines featuring her in the past few years. White Rabbit is out currently to prove that she's one of the baddest bads around and earn acclaim and recognition for her misdeeds. In the Absolute Carnage one-shot symbiote Spider-Man, we get to see White Rabbit featured in a much darker tale when she runs into a judge who at one point came into contact with the Venom symbiote. She ends up getting on his bad side, and in order to get back at him for what she believes was an unfair trial, she comes after him and his son, confronting them with a gun. It turns out the weapon is a joke gun which shoots out a little flag that says bang, but the shock of the whole event triggers a heart attack in the judge's son, Dan, who dies as a result, because he's kinda got a weak heart. White Rabbit is arrested but escapes at her trial, being busted out by a large mech-like rabbit. She torments the judge as she leaves, who attempts to break into the courtroom to kill her, but accidentally shoots an innocent court stenographer instead. Lorena might have shown remorse here, but the fact that she messed with this man's life so intensely and then later was absolved of guilt by him killing an innocent man shows just how twisted and cold she can really be. Plus, she has all the money and all that tech to torment her foes with, so there's also that. Is White Rabbit like the Batman of villains in Marvel? That's the question. Number 9. Sin Eater. Sin Eater has definitely been an up-and-comer in the Spider-Man comics lately. He was in league with newish villain Kindred and was working to eradicate sin out in the world. Kindred was actually the one to bring Sin Eater back to life after he died previously in the comics, being a villain who actually goes all the way back to the 80s in terms of his first appearance. First appearing in Peter Parker The Spectacular Spider-Man issue 107. After being resurrected by Kindred, Sin Eater, aka Stanley Carter, could absorb the powers of the villains whose sins he cleansed, making him immensely powerful. However, despite being crazy capable in terms of what he could do and his power set, Carter was defeated with logic when he was made to question his own actions and his philosophies, learning that he himself had been manipulated. As a result, he took himself out of the picture, taking his own life. Still, Sin Eater has died and returned before, and it could very well happen again in the future. Which honestly, I feel like I'd like, because I feel like Sin Eater, he was really cool. Now he's gone. Sad. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving the Spider-Man comics as much as we are loving the Spider-Man comics, and you're also excited for what's coming after, I know I am, be sure to show that by giving this video a thumbs up. We're gonna have so much Spider-Man soon, it's gonna be crazy. I'm so here for it. Number 8. Scorpion. Scorpion not only has made an appearance on the big screen, but is currently running with the Savage Six in the comics. Scorpion is Matt Gargan, a villain who in recent years had been painted as pretty terrifying. Remember during Dark Reign when he was Norman Osborn's Spider-Man, running around wearing the Venom symbiote and eating people? Yeah, that was the thing that happened. Matt Gargan has proven multiple times how intimidating and strong he can be, and he still remains someone to be feared even as he returns to his more classic look, power set, and mantle. Number 7. King Pig. King Pig is Spider-Ham's version of Kingpin. As such, King Pig hails from the same reality of Earth 8311. He is, as you guessed it, one big mean pig, who also happens to be a major crime lord, like his 616 counterpart. However, while Kingpin in the comics is more into drug rings and other organized crime, King Pig is into smuggling cheese and running the cheese market. Now I want cheese. King Pig operated in secret, and despite the police trying to uncover who was behind the crimes in their town of Hakkawatami, Wisconsin, King Pig managed to be too sneaky for them to catch. In the end, it was up to Spider-Ham to discover just who was behind all this illegal activity. We already had Kingpin show up as the villain in Into the Spider-Verse, so how funny and great would it be to see his Toon counterpart in Across the Spider-Verse? Also, I'd really like to go to Spider-Ham's reality, if we get a reality hop, which I think we're gonna get to do that. Number 6. Goblin. In the noir verse of Earth 90214, Green Goblin's counterpart is simply known as Goblin. Here, Norman Osborn is still a ruthless villain who is the major crime boss in New York and leads his own villainous group known as the Enforcers. The Enforcers are made up of former carnival freaks who each have their own unique talents, featuring characters like the noir verse's Vulture and Chameleon. Goblin turned to a life of crime because he was mistreated, himself being a circus freak who was ridiculed for his scaly, green, reptile-like skin. Goblin in the comics is the one who is ultimately responsible for the death of Peter Parker's Uncle Ben and for the death of Ben Urich, the reporter and Felicia Hardy's former lover in this reality. Number 5. Patton Parnell. Patton Parnell has to be one of my favorite of the evil alternate Spider-Men out there, and I think he would make a bomb villain in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, especially if we get some kind of League of Evil Spider-Men. Patton Parnell is the alternate Spider-Man from Earth 51412. Like the Spider, who is on Part 1 of our list, Parnell also has some sociopathic tendencies and enjoys recreational activities like burning ants with a magnifying glass. He ends up becoming a Spider-Man in a more literal sense, becoming a spider-like monstrosity who is also capable of laying eggs, as his Uncle Ted, who also appears to mistreat young Patton, finds out. Rather than Patton Parnell having an origin story of fantasy and heroism, his origin is basically more like a horror story, where Patton ends up as a murderous, monstrous, spider-like villain who develops a taste for human flesh and terrorizes his next-door neighbor and crush, Sarah Jane. Number 4. Tyler Stone. We talked about Alchemax, the villainous future corporation, on the Part 1 to our list, and even an alternate video game reality where Peter ends up as the man behind that corporation, but we have yet to focus on the vice president of Alchemax's R&D department in the main 2099 reality of Earth 928, Tyler Stone. Tyler Stone is not only VP of Research and Development at Alchemax, but also is secretly Miguel O'Hara's biological father. Tyler Stone had an affair with the wife of one of his employees, Conchata, who is Miguel's mother. Miguel doesn't learn until later on that he is the son of Stone, and ends up on the staff of Alchemax, working as a brilliant geneticist for them. When he tries to leave, however, it is Stone who slips him the highly addictive drug only made by Alchemax known as Rapture, to prevent him from leaving. Fortunately, Miguel manages to free himself via experimentation, which also gives him spider-like powers and abilities, becoming Spider-Man 2099.
And coming in number 3, we have Spider-Side, like genocide but performed by a spider. Yeah, that is not the best writing I've ever heard of in my life. Spider-Side was birthed out of the Clone Saga, which is considered one of the worst sagas in comic history, so any villain to come out of it is probably never going to see the light of day again unless they're used as a joke. Spider-Side is a clone of Spider-Man that has the ability to regenerate from what seems to be any accident. He was convinced at first that he was the real Peter Parker, but then he found out that he was just a freak. Such is the plight of most clones. When you read his character on paper, it sounds super cool. He has the powers of Spider-Man with some of the most deadly features of the Terminator, but the character was used in such a horrible fashion that it became a laughingstock before it ever got its time to shine. Maybe in the future we'll see someone use this character to its full ability.
Number 2. Plant Man. In Strange Tales number 113 from 1963, we meet the mysterious Plant Man. This gardener turned professional criminal was born in London and orphaned at a young age. When he left the orphanage, he became lab assistant to a well-known botanist who was studying the low-level mental activity of plant life. Unfortunately, this guy fired him for focusing too much on this invention he was making and not gardening for him. One day, lightning strikes his plant ray gun that he's been working on, and it becomes imbued with the power to control and animate plant life. Ooh. So he then makes a disguise and sets out to get his revenge for being fired by framing his boss for robbery. The plant life isn't the only thing with low-level mental activity, as this guy made from leaves somehow thinks that he can take on the Human Torch. He is later quickly defeated and his ray gun is destroyed, although I'm sad to say he does appear again in 2002.
And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Big Wheel. This villain's theme is a massive wheel that he rides around and it has guns on it. Reading some of these is like watching a breakdown of a group of YouTubers trying to find out what they need to do so they can set their channel apart from everyone else. Like maybe if I was the wheel guy, then people would like my content. Well, Big Wheel's just an ordinary guy until the Tinkerer gave him something that was probably a prank. A massive wheel that could ride around and had guns on it. You think something like that would be extremely hard to control, and you would be right. Big Wheel would die when he lost control of his massive wheel car thing and fell into a river and drowned. Here's a lesson for any future villain. If you want to pick a gimmick that is going to set you apart from the rest, before you make a hard decision and invest in a giant wheel that will get you killed and make you look like a fool, you should probably hire a think tank to come up with a better idea. Like I said earlier on in this list, you can pick whatever power you want when you're building it from scratch, so why go with wheels?
Number 10. White Rabbit. You might not think of Lorena Dodson as being a very dark villain. She's just a woman after all who's obsessed with Alice in Wonderland and basically turned to a life of crime because she was bored. Her greatest power is her wealth, which allows her the gadgets and goons she needs to be a supervillain and a criminal. However, during the Absolute Carnage tie-in, Symbiote Spider-Man, we get a little side story involving a man who once wore the symbiote suit unknowingly that also features Dodson. In it, she ends up aiming to scare the man who is actually a judge that condemns her in court after being a witness to her causing a public disturbance and assaulting civilians at a local burger joint. Her scare attempt, however, results in the death of the man's son, who goes into cardiac arrest. The whole story is pretty dark. Number 9. Morbius. Morbius isn't always a Spider-Man villain, but he did start out in the comics that way. Although he is more of a neutral figure inherently, his pseudoscientific vampirism and bloodthirst often put him in the villain category, and put him in conflict with none other than Spider-Man. Which I also kind of get, considering that the first time they met, like most old school comics, they had some miscommunication which led to a fight between Morbius, the Lizard, and Spider-Man. And during the fight, everyone seemed to miraculously discover they needed the other's blood to become cured from their ailment. And so the blood wars began, and the stealing and baiting of blood would become a common trope for the sometimes villain known as Morbius. He's like a blood bandit. He loves to steal that blood. Number 8. Tombstone. Some might think that Tombstone is some kind of zombie or Frankenstein's monster type villain just based on his look. While Lonnie Lincoln was later on mutated by exposure to a chemical, which granted him superhuman strength and durability, previous to this, he was actually just a crime boss with albinism. In fact, it was likely all the teasing that he suffered as a child due to his condition that likely encouraged him to become an indomitable criminal, filing down his teeth to appear more intimidating. His dark, grim, yet striking appearance is also a result of the time period in which he was introduced. Tombstone made his first appearance in the Web of Spider-Man series in 1988. He's definitely got a very 80s villain look. Number 7. Sauron. We've talked about the dark tragedy that is Morbius' existence, and now it's time to talk about another monster villain of Spider-Man's rogue gallery, Sauron. Carl Lycos was bit by pteranodons from the Savage Lands while on an expedition with his father. These bites would cause Carl to transform later on, causing him to need to drain the life energy of others in order to survive, basically turning him into an energy vampire. But from there, his story would only get more strange and tragic. While siphoning energy from a mutant, he underwent a further transformation, turning him into a hybrid creature, part pteranodon, part human. While Sauron was originally introduced as a villain during the X-Men comics, Spider-Man would face him during his time working alongside the mutants, both taking on Sauron and the team known as the Savage Mutates, and later fighting against Sauron with his own mutant class that he was currently leading and teaching. I love Spider-Man as a mutant teacher, I think it's super cute. Number 6. Kane. Kane Parker was the broken clone that Jackal brought into the world first, his first discarded attempt at cloning Peter Parker. He's also the epitome of 90s edge and darkness with his originally dark billowing locks and tattered cape. Although not specifically a Spider-Man villain anymore, when Kane was originally introduced he was very much a misguided rogue. Kane is also known for his fragile psyche and unique ability known as the Mark of Cain. Many originally thought that this ability was Kane emitting acid from his hands to burn his victims, but in reality he actually has a bunch of tiny hooks on his hands that allow him to climb, like many spider folk and actual spiders. He can use these hooks to dig into someone's flesh, making it look like he has left an acid burn when really he just dug a bunch of super tiny spider hooks into their face. Yay. Number 4. Kingpin. Despite the fact that Kingpin isn't one of the first people you think of when you think of dark and menacing Spider-Man villains, he's been around since the early days of Spider-Man's adventures, appearing in Spider-Man comics in the 1960s alongside many of Spider-Man's other classic villains. Wilson Fisk has always been one of the darkest, most menacing villains because of the amount of power and control that he wields. In the film Into the Spider-Verse, we saw respect paid to this character in terms of how great of a Spider-Man villain he truly is when he became the big bad of the film that Miles and his team of spider folks went up against. He was also the one responsible for killing the Peter Parker from Miles' own reality. And in the comics, he also almost killed Spider-Man's Aunt May after learning of Spider-Man's secret identity and choosing to target those Peter loved during the events of the Back in Black story. Number 3. Lizard. Lizard is one of the darkest villains on Spider-Man's roster because of how tragic his origins are. Kirk Connors basically is a victim in a monster horror story, a sort of werewolf-like scenario, but as a lizard instead of a wolf. Dr. Connors simply sought to explore the science behind possible limb regeneration, and it was his studies and exposure to an experimental serum that caused him to transform into the villain known as the Lizard. He is often presented as a villain who has no choice but to give in to his animal instincts, which is what makes him so villainous, while Connors himself really has no intention to harm others. The monster within him, however, the Lizard, often does. At one point he transforms back into the villain known as the Lizard during a story called Shed and is tragically consumed by his animal instincts completely, which causes him to eat his own son. It doesn't get much darker than that. Number 2. Scorpion. Originally, Matt Gargan was just a private investigator hired by Jameson to uncover the secret of how exactly Peter Parker was able to get the best pictures of Spider-Man. He was later coerced into participating in an experiment wherein he was combined with the traits of a scorpion. This gave Gargan superpowers but also drove him insane, transforming him into a criminal and a villain. During Dark Reign, Matt Gargan would become Norman Osborn's Spider-Man on his Dark Avengers team, bonding with the Venom symbiote, and becoming one of the most vicious iterations of Venom to date when bonded with it. In fact, anytime Scorpion and the Venom symbiote have merged in the comics, they become a deadly villain, often going on a murderous rampage, shamelessly consuming their victims, and becoming an almost uncontrollable level of deadly. If you thought Eddie Brock's Venom was scary, no. Scorpion as Venom is scary. Number 1. Jackal. Jackal, of course, is one of the darkest Spider-Man supervillains around. He was Gwen Stacy's teacher, Professor Warren, but became obsessed with Gwen and fell in love with her. When Gwen died during the battle between Green Goblin and Spider-Man, the professor blamed Spider-Man and decided he would create a clone of her and Peter Parker after learning of Spider-Man's true identity. He was the villain behind the events of Clone Saga, creating more than one clone of Peter and Gwen Stacy. And if you thought the Scorpion was scary, Jackal was also a villain who teamed up with Scorpion and even sent him to kill Spider-Man at one point. He also kidnapped and threatened the life of people Parker cared for, such as his good friend Ned Leeds.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have the Thousand, aka Carl King. The Thousand made a brief but memorable appearance in the comics, beginning with Spider-Man Tangled Web number 1 back in 2001. Carl's origin story is quite compelling, as he actually witnessed Peter Parker obtain his powers by being bitten by the radioactive spider. He's clearly upset and a tad jealous. The opening of the issue has him just staring out of a cafe window, just stewing in the fact that it should have been him instead of Peter Parker to get those powers, which, you know what, I understand, man. I say that every single time I watch a Marvel movie. So, making a terrifying entrance, he reveals himself as the Thousand. So instead of getting the same powers as Peter, he actually turned into 1,000 spiders. No, I don't like that. I feel sick looking at this guy. The last page of his first issue really pulls you in. It's his skin suit, like it's his skin as a suit, just chilling on a coat hook, while he takes over Miss Peyton, even revealing that he ate her from the inside out. He's a bunch of spiders that take over your body. No wonder we didn't hear much about this guy. Yuck. Next, get out of here. And before we move on with our list, guys, if you haven't already, please toss us a like down below. It's a big help to us here at our secret underground bunker. Thank you so much. Okay, back to these crazy villains. And coming in at number 9, we have the Spot. Making his first appearance in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 98, the Spot isn't exactly the coolest villain per se. I mean, he doesn't throw pumpkin bombs, he's not made of 1,000 spiders, but when Jonathan Owen was exposed to the spotted dimension during an experiment, his skin became white with black spots, and those spots acting as warps in space. Honestly, this character is super unique. In his second issue, you really see what he can do. He uses these portals to punch through space and hit his victims far away. He holds these portals like frisbees, and personally, I would love to see this guy fight Doctor Strange. The whole portal versus portal action alone would be mint. And they're both doctors. So why hasn't this happened yet? I don't know. Seeing Spider-Man use his portals to hit Thanos in Infinity War makes me think if the Spot was in a Spider-Man movie, it would be just hours of that. And honestly, that would be sweet, I'm here for it. I wish I was the Spot. Scratching your back would be so much easier. Instead of reaching and like trying to like pull your shoulders out, no thank you. Much better. Coming in at number 8, we have Swarm. Oh, you thought I was done with disgusting Swarm villains. No, think again. Fritz von Meyer made his debut in Champions issue 14 back in 1977. And as you can probably guess by his name, yes, he's made of a swarm of bees. Kind of like the 1,000, except somehow worse. He's also a scientist. So for sure worse, definitely worse. He used stolen gold to pay for all of his projects. So he's a Nazi beekeeper who steals gold. Great. You're a villain. You did it. So it's no surprise we haven't heard much about him. I mean, what a weird character. One day he found a beehive that was not like any other. So Fritz made a device that hoped would reawaken these bees, which he thought were like the end result of a mutation with a nearby fallen meteorite. The bees woke up, but then they continued to attack and kill Fritz, the beekeeper Fritz. No, not him. And then his consciousness was spread out through all of those bees, and now you have the swarm. Literally the bee's knees. I don't care how tough you think you are, there's no chance you're going toe to toe with bees. There's no fight. If I was swinging around the city and a swarm of bees was robbing a bank, I didn't see that. I'm just gonna keep heading to Aunt May's. No worries. Headphones are going back in. Good luck. RIP, good game. And coming in at number 7, we have Mindworm. In Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 138, we were introduced to William Turner. No, not that William Turner, although I'm sure he'd be great. He's probably fine. I'm talking about the telepathic, tragic, minor Spider-Man villain, Mindworm. Born with limited telepathic powers, he was the cause of his parents' untimely death, and he suffered from it for quite a while. So he grew up in an orphanage and protected himself from bullies using his mind powers, thus donning the nickname Mindworm. He's extremely smart. He even looks smart too, with his big giant brain head. He attacked Peter once by hijacking the minds of others to do the dirty work, so people just started attacking him randomly. What I like most about this villain is he tries not to be a villain, for the most part at least. He just feels this tremendous guilt after being born this way. I mean, it's not his fault. Number 6, Red Goblin. Green Goblin plus Carnage equals holy shit. Appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man 798, Norman Osborn stole the Carnage symbiote, and then after that, it was just a nightmare. So Norman used the symbiote to eject all of the nanites, but then that ended up creating this monster mash, becoming the Red Goblin. Put them both together, very scary. The rare weaknesses that the symbiotes do have went away once the two had merged, right? So if you think you can use sound or fire to take this guy out, it's your funeral, no way. Green Goblin was fine with those things, so now the Carnage side of Red Goblin isn't affected either. Even the bombs that he used are like these Carnage pumpkin bombs that will like bite you. It's all fused together and it's really intimidating. I'd love to see more of the Red Goblin, let's go.
Number 5, Kraven. For Kraven the Hunter, Spider-Man has always been the #1 prize. This was the inspiration for the story Kraven's Last Hunt, where it appeared that Kraven had finally captured and defeated Spider-Man by killing him. In truth, he had simply incapacitated Spider-Man, placing him in a comatose, death-like state for a few weeks. When Spider-Man awoke, he discovered that Kraven had basically been standing in for him while he was out, and it was revealed to Peter that Kraven's whole plan was to beat Spider-Man at his own game, proving that he himself was a better hero than the Spider by becoming sort of Spider-Man? In the end, Kraven felt he had accomplished what he had set out to do, and in a way also showed respect for Peter Parker's approach to heroism. Feeling that he was almost at peace with the world, Kraven took his own life, ending his legacy. Or at least this would have been a dark but meaningful end to his legacy, but instead of staying dead, Kraven would later be resurrected. Oh, comics. Number 4. Norman Osborn. Green Goblin, as he was originally known, has had a lot of different villain identities. Norman Osborn is often a criminal mastermind, and was the criminal mastermind behind the events of Dark Reign, when he was known as the leader of the Dark Avengers, Iron Patriot. He's also stepped in as a sort of alternate Carnage, believing he himself was in fact Cletus Cassidy, and has been known as the combination villain of Red Goblin as well, probably one of the most terrifying iterations we have seen of him yet as a villain. And he was also the Goblin King for a time. No relation to Madeline Pryor's Goblin Queen, by the way. But when it boils down to it, Norman Osborn is one of the darkest Spider-Man villains because he is so focused on going that extra mile just to find new and insanely twisted ways to torture Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Dude is crazy. I love it. Number 3. Kindred. This villain is pretty dark since it's been alluded to that they are a demon from hell. In life, they were someone close to Peter Parker who was betrayed by him and by Norman Osborn. They have returned to get vengeance and use demonic centipede creatures to manipulate others by having these summoned creatures crawl inside those that they wish to torment. Ick. But also not ick to house centipedes, which are lovely little creatures who feed on other house pests. We like house centipedes, but we do not like demon mind control centipedes. Yes? Except MJ maybe is a fan, as she was actually pretty nice to kindred centipedes prior to us really knowing that they were definitely a villain out to get revenge on Peter Parker, of course. Number 2. Carnage. Sure, Kindred is a former human and current demon from hell, but Carnage is like a demon on Earth. Even disregarding the dark attachment that the Carnage symbiote had to serial killer Cletus Cassidy, Carnage recently became an even more darker villain after the Carnage symbiote appeared to die attempting to preserve Cletus during his re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere. While attempting to protect its human host, the symbiote actually burned up, and even more tragic, depending on your perspective I guess, it failed to save Cletus, who also appeared to have died on arrival. However, the Null-worshipping cult known as the Church of Darkness managed to resurrect Cletus by bonding the Grendel symbiote to him, allowing them to become a new Carnage known as Dark Carnage. Cletus was intended to be the vessel that would allow Null to awaken and return, but in order to do so he would have to collect codices from the spines of those who had previously bonded to a symbiote. I mean, dark is also in the name for this version of Carnage, but also this guy literally eats spines for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So yeah, pretty dark. Number 1. Mephisto. Of course, it can't possibly get more dark than Mephisto. When it comes to his feud with Spider-Man, or Spider-Folks for that matter, Mephisto seems to have a bit of an obsession. He saved Aunt May for Peter in exchange for his marriage to MJ, saved Miles Morales as Spider-Man's teammates in exchange for the life of a civilian that Miles had saved in that other timeline where his teammates died, and he convinced Otto Octavius as Superior Spider-Man to return to a life of villainy in order to defeat an alternate reality Spidey who was also that Earth's Norman Osborn. That's like getting rid of 2 Spider-Men with 1 stone. I like to imagine he keeps these little wins and trophies in a shrine that he has in his closet, because he is secretly the biggest Spider-Man fan ever. He even possessed Gwenpool's brother, and she's really only a small percentage related to the Spider-Verse as a sort of alternate version of Gwen Stacy mixed with Deadpool. Mephisto has revealed it's his dream to make life a living hell for all Spider-Folks everywhere. How nice. Add in the fact that he's basically Marvel's version of the devil, and you've got one twisted and dark Spider-Man villain. Possibly the most dark. Number 10. Electro. Electro, even in his first appearance in issue 9 of the original Amazing Spider-Man series, was beating Spider-Man. At least, initially. When Spider-Man first meets Electro, he doesn't know what to do, and Electro gets away a few times before Spider-Man manages to stop him. At one point, Spider-Man even reaches out to try and grab Electro. Not a great idea. While Electro is in his electric shock condition, his words, not mine, it turns out touching him is deadly. Spider-Man survives the great electric shock he is given, but is forced to modify his costume in order to take on Electro in the future. He adds on rubber slippers and gloves, and likely in the future would make make modifications to his costume, adding in rubber insulation in case he came up against the villain again, which he would many times. Because yeah, that's only issue 9. It goes on for a lot longer than issue 9. Number 9, Mephisto. Mephisto might not win in the most obvious ways, but he definitely is always sneakily on the up and up when it comes to him versus heroes. Any heroes really, Spider-Man included. In the case of Mephisto versus Spider-Man, that sounded more legal than I intended, but I guess we are dealing with binding contracts. Mephisto ended up helping Peter to get what he needed, but at a price. He required in exchange Peter's marriage to MJ, which for comic book continuity meant undoing that rocky but ongoing union. Spider-Man got what he wanted, Aunt May was safe and his identity was a secret once more, but I don't think he really realized what he was giving up until he experienced it. MJ didn't even seem to recall their marriage, although lately it seems to be implied that she might have known more about their past than she's let on. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you love it when I talk about villains, I love talking about villains, then be sure to show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out here. I'm not just saying that. They don't just pay me to say that. This is the truth. Number 8, Chameleon. In his first appearance, Chameleon left Spider-Man running away in tears, ruining the day he ever became Spider-Man. Chameleon may have been apprehended in the end of issue number 1 of Amazing Spider-Man, but somehow it still felt as though he came out on top. Dang it, because Chameleon, you know, he's a villain, so he shouldn't win. Although I am kind of rooting for him sometimes. During their conflict, Chameleon attempted to make it seem as though Spider-Man was up to no good, impersonating him while committing acts of thievery and fleeing from the police. Oh no! Even once Spider-Man managed to catch him, it still seemed as though Chameleon might get away. Fortunately, Spider-Man had his spider sense to let him know something was up. He managed to get away from Chameleon, but it was only because Chameleon's disguise had become damaged in the fray that the villain was caught at all. So Spider-Man didn't even really win that day. It was more just like Chameleon made a mistake. And it was like, dang it. Now it's revealed who I am because you can see the Spider-Man suit underneath and I was impersonating Spider-Man. How embarrassing.
And it's 7, Spider-Side. Spider-Side is a more obscure and odd Spider-Man villain that I still think would make a great addition to the MCU. Being first introduced as Spider-Side in New Warriors number 61, this version of Peter Parker is one of the clones made by Dr. Miles Warren, which is an entirely separate villain that could also appear, but I'm sure they would explain this away with someone remembering Mysterio revealing Peter's identity and then gaining a DNA sample. What's notable about Spider-Side, however, is not only him having all of Spider-Man's powers, but also the ability to stretch and warp his body at will, similar to Mr. Fantastic, which could be another way to introduce the Fantastic Four to the MCU as well. Spider-Side is also definitely deadly, helping Jackal to release a virus in Springfield, Pennsylvania, resulting in the deaths of over 2,600 people. Is it likely that this character will appear in the MCU? No. But would I love to see it? Absolutely. And at 6, Morbius. Michael Morbius will be getting his own movie in 2022. However, it is not planned to be a part of the MCU, rather a part of the SSU, Sony's Spider-Man universe, along with Venom, Let There Be Carnage, and Kraven the Hunter. First introduced in Amazing Spider-Man number 101 in 1971, Dr. Michael Morbius was a scientist born in Greece who became a Nobel Prize-winning biochemist. He was suffering from a blood disease and developed an experimental treatment in an effort to cure it. Its side effects, though, turned him into vampire Jason, who ended up needing to consume blood in order to survive and gain typical vampire characteristics such as aversion to sunlight and the powers of flight, enhanced strength, speed, and a healing factor. His overall appearance also changed as well. He gained fangs, his nose flattened to appear more like a bat, and his skin became extremely pale like me but with less of a nose and sharper teeth. Additionally, the victims of his bite would turn into living vampires themselves, which is absolutely crazy. This character also made an appearance in the 90s Spider-Man animated series, however it was a kids show so he had to consume plasma instead of blood, and his origin was changed as well when he spliced his DNA with Peter Parker's using the neurogenic recombinator and a bat jumped in front of the ray. Would I like to see him in the MCU? Of course, he's an iconic villain, but I don't know if Sony is gonna let go of the leash that they have around the other Spider-Man characters considering how well Spider-Man's doing in the MCU and they ain't making enough profit from it. Just saying. Halfway through into number 5, Kingpin. Wilson Fisk. First appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man number 50 in 1967, Wilson Grant Fisk is a wealthy entrepreneur and philanthropist by day, but secretly is a criminal mastermind running nearly all of New York's underground activities. The character has been adapted into multiple different media, including video games, TV, movies, and cartoons as well. But could the character be coming to the MCU? It's possible, with fans speculating the introduction of Matt Murdock, also known as Daredevil, as Peter's lawyer in No Way Home. Both characters the Kingpin is associated with will be in the MCU, and considering the magnitude of that and his existence in the Daredevil Netflix series, it's certainly possible we get Wilson Fisk on the big screen. The reason people believe Matt Murdock to be in this movie is thanks to a slight differentiation in the leaked trailer versus the official one. In the scene where the files are slammed onto the desk, in the leaked trailer we can see this man's face. However, in the official one his face is out of frame. This seems to indicate the desire to keep his character secret, but is this the case, or is Marvel just pulling a double bluff? I guess we'll have to wait until Christmas to find out. In at 4, Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter is one of Spider-Man's earlier villains, appearing first in The Amazing Spider-Man number 15 from 1964. Since then, Kraven has endured as one of the web-slinger's most formidable foes, and is part of the collective of adversaries that make up Spider-Man's rogues gallery. Kraven has since come into conflict with other heroes as well, such as the Black Panther. He is also the half-brother of the Chameleon, and is one of the founding members of the Sinister Six. With the potential of Chameleon being introduced in No Way Home, we also have to consider Kraven's likelihood of appearing, especially considering how he's getting his own movie in the Sony Spider-Man universe, which means if the two universes ever merge or cross over due to some other spell gone wrong, the character will surely make an appearance or at least be confirmed, even if he's not on screen, because you know, he'll be in that universe. Kraven is one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains and is one that I see as a recurring request by fans. I certainly think that there are more interesting characters that could be used instead, but I'd still be happy to see him in the MCU.
Number 3, Morlun and the Inheritors. Now I know some people are not going to like me putting Morlun this high on the list, because I know there are some out there who detest both him and the Inheritors, but I truly believe that he deserves this spot along with his family of alternate dimension Victorian energy vampires. Yeah, I said it. They're kinda weird, but so what? I personally think that that's always been part of the charm of both Spider-Man and Batman's rogues galleries, and what makes them both superheroes who have some of the best villains out there. They got a lot of weird villains, Morlun notwithstanding. Morlun is an energy vampire who, along with his family, not only threaten the life of Peter Parker, but just about every other Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, and any other spider folks out there. He also showed up in the Spider-Man story The Other and proved not just how deadly he was, but how cruel he was as well, which in terms of ranking powerful Spider-Man villains should earn him bonus points, as those two seem to go hand in hand. Cruelty usually comes with power in these stories. Number 2, Null. Null is coming, and he's not just coming for Venom, he's coming for everyone this time around. Still, originally Null was a cosmic god and villain intrinsically tied to Venom in the comics, and he was asleep, so he was a villain who not everyone had to worry about, because, you know, he was snoring. But Null being a Venom villain means that he is therefore part of the Spideyverse in comics, as Venom comes from Spider-Man comics originally. All in all, Spider-Man's world just keeps growing and expanding every year, especially as more and more are getting that additional symbiote fever. Null is known as the first god of the Abyss, the god of darkness and symbiotes. He is the creator of symbiotes, and we've watched here and there as now that he is awake, he's racing across the galaxy, raising planets and bringing darkness wherever he goes. He's heading for Earth, and he's likely going to end up being one of the greatest threats Spider-Man, Venom, and all of our Marvel heroes have ever faced. Number 1, Mephisto. Mephisto is one of the most epic Spider-Man villains and is definitely one of the most powerful ones around. Mephisto is a universal constant and has the power to do things like alter history. He saved Miles' friends in exchange for one life that Miles had previously saved. He saved Aunt May in exchange for erasing Peter's marriage from existence. He basically is this all-powerful being that, for almost no conceivable reason, is just super obsessed with spider folks. I swear, I think he just actually wants to be their best friends, but he just doesn't know how because he's like super awkward, so instead he bullies and torments these heroes. Mephisto likely just needs more hugs. But he's still one of the most powerful villains around. Hey, even powerful villains need love. Thank you so much for watching, Nerd Squad. What are some of your favorite Spider-Man villains? Who do you think is the most powerful? Is there anyone you think we've missed who you'd love to see on a part 2 to this list?